At every Thanksgiving dinner, there's always that one relative who makes a joke that goes just a bit too far. In my family, that relative was Uncle Roy. He wore sarcasm like cologne, thick, noticeable, and hard to ignore. And that year, as I walked into my parents' house with a bottle of cranberry cider under one arm and a pie I'd made myself in the other, his voice cut through the living room like a butter knife. "Well, look who finally showed up," Roy said, his lips twitching into a smirk. "He'll probably ask for leftovers before we even sit down." The room chuckled lightly, everyone but me. I forced a smile, said nothing, and handed my pie to my cousin Kelly in the kitchen. It wasn't the first time Roy had made a dig at me in front of everyone, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. I was used to it by now. "My name's Nate. I'm 31. I own a small tech consulting business I started out of my college dorm, and though it's doing well now, more than well, honestly, you'd never guess it from the way my family treats me. To them, I'm still the quiet one, the weird kid who always had his head in a laptop or sketchpad instead of playing catch in the backyard. My younger sister, Melanie, on the other hand, she could do no wrong. She was the cheer captain, the homecoming queen, the straight A student who married young, divorced quietly, and was now dating a new guy the family was excited to meet. I hadn't been to a family Thanksgiving in 3 years. I'd skipped the last 2 after Mom called and said, "It's probably best if you focus on your work this year. You've been so distant." Distant, in my family, was code for you didn't play along when we made you the punchline. But this year, after some persuading from my cousin Kelly and a carefully worded email from Mom, I agreed to come back. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel how little had changed. The living room was packed. Cousins, aunts, uncles, neighbors who always seemed to find their way over around dinner. The fireplace was lit, the football game was on, and the table was already set for what looked like 20 people. I scanned the room, looking for a seat or even just a place to put my coat, but no one made much effort to greet me. Just a few nods, a half-hearted, "Hey Nate," and then back to their conversations. In the kitchen, Kelly hugged me and said she was glad I made it. She was the only one who'd ever really understood me. We grew up more like siblings than cousins, spending summers playing video games and building forts out of sofa cushions while the rest of the kids were outside trying to be athletes. She glanced at me with a look I couldn't quite read, part concern, part caution. "Melanie's bringing her boyfriend," she whispered, glancing toward the door. "Brace yourself. Everyone's already obsessed with him." I raised an eyebrow. "That fast?" Kelly shrugged. "You know how Mom and Aunt Linda are. New guy walks in, smiles once, and suddenly he's family." I chuckled softly and opened the fridge to stash my cider. "What's he like?" "Smooth," Kelly said, wrinkling her nose. "Too smooth. Like someone who practices compliments in the mirror." Just as I was about to ask more, I heard the front door open. The room quieted, then erupted with greetings and laughter. Melanie had arrived. I stepped into the hallway just in time to see her walk in, wrapped in a camel-colored coat, her arm looped through the elbow of a tall guy in a navy blazer. He had that polished, magazine cover look, chiseled jawline, expensive haircut, clean-shaven, and confident. His eyes scanned the room like he already owned it. "Everyone," Melanie beamed, "this is Carter." Carter. Of course his name was Carter. He gave a charming little wave and smiled, that kind of smile you usually see in toothpaste ads. One by one, the family fawned over him. Uncle Roy clapped him on the back, Aunt Linda offered him wine before he even took off his coat, and my mom had that sparkle in her eyes, the one she used to reserve for Melanie's ex-husband, before he apparently became persona non grata. Carter's eyes landed on me briefly, then flicked away like I was just another lamp in the corner. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask my name. He didn't even nod. I stood there awkwardly before retreating to the kitchen again. The evening dragged on. Carter charmed every adult in the house. He helped Grandma with the mashed potatoes, showed the little cousins a card trick, and even helped Uncle Jerry fix the wobbly leg on the folding table. I watched all of it in quiet disbelief. The guy was running for family president, and he was winning by a landslide. Dinner was announced, and everyone scrambled for seats like it was musical chairs. I found a spot on the far end of the kids' table, which now hosted the leftovers, the unmarried cousins, the quiet ones, the ones who didn't bring a date. I didn't mind, honestly. It gave me space to think. As we ate, I kept noticing Carter glancing at me. It wasn't constant, but enough that I felt it. I wasn't sure what it meant. Maybe he finally realized I existed. Maybe he was just curious why no one had introduced us. Maybe, deep down, he was threatened by me. I doubted it, though. Dessert came around, and Kelly passed me a plate of pumpkin pie. "Holding up okay?" she asked quietly. "Fine," I said, though I didn't sound convincing. Then, just as I was taking my first bite, I heard it again. Uncle Roy, loud as ever. "You know, I bet Nate's just here for the leftovers." There was laughter. Someone muttered, "Well, he is the quiet type." And someone else added, "He probably brought Tupperware." It wasn't funny, but I smiled anyway. That's what you do when you've been the family's punchline for most of your life. You smile, and you wait for it to pass. But this time, it didn't pass. This time, someone across the table froze. Carter. He was staring at me now. Really staring. Like he'd seen a ghost. Melanie nudged him gently. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer. His brow furrowed. Then, slowly, he reached into the inner pocket of his blazer, pulled out his phone, and tapped it a few times with a shaky finger. "That's him," he whispered. Melanie frowned. "What?" Carter looked at me again, then turned the phone around to show her something. She leaned in, squinted, and her face went pale. Next to her, my Aunt Linda, who had been sipping wine and laughing at a joke someone told, caught sight of the screen and let out a tiny gasp. Her hand trembled, her glass tilted, and in one quick motion, red wine splashed across the table and shattered on the hardwood floor. The room fell silent. All eyes were on me, and I had absolutely no idea why. But I was about to find out. I didn't move at first. Just sat there, forks suspended midair, confused as hell while the room around me froze in place. Aunt Linda's broken wine glass lay scattered on the floor like a metaphor for whatever tension had just splintered through the air. Someone was whispering, too low to catch. Melanie's hand was clamped around Carter's wrist, and he was still holding out his phone, though he'd turned it slightly now, angling the screen away from me. Their eyes flicked between me and the image, back and forth, like they were trying to match a face to a mugshot. And I couldn't shake this gnawing feeling in my stomach, that I was missing something big. Something that, judging by the reactions, I was the last person in the room to understand. Then Melanie leaned back in her chair and muttered, just barely above a whisper, "You didn't tell me it was him." Carter still didn't say anything. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just invisible anymore. I was something worse. I was recognized, and not in a good way. "Okay," I said, my voice breaking through the silence like a cracked window pane. "Someone want to let me in on the joke?" No one laughed. No one spoke. Finally, Carter cleared his throat. "You run a consulting firm, right? Software security?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's right." "What?" He pressed his lips together, weighing his words. "Do you ever do legal audits? Internal breach reviews?" My mind reeled. That wasn't exactly my bread and butter, but I'd taken a few private contracts over the years, usually small companies looking to quietly identify leaks, backdoors, embezzlement. All hush-hush stuff. I was careful. Always signed NDAs. Always made sure I didn't poke where I wasn't welcome. Carter set his phone face down on the table like it was radioactive. "You did a contract last year with Linton Dynamics." And then it hit me. Linton. God. That job. It was one of the messiest I'd ever taken. An insider had been siphoning intellectual property and leaking prototypes to a rival firm. Took me weeks to trace it. I'd followed the trail through VPNs, burner accounts, cloaked servers, until I finally narrowed it down to an employee named Ethan Warren. Corporate brought the hammer down hard. Terminated him the next day. I heard later they filed a civil suit. But that was where my involvement ended. Or at least I thought it did. Carter's eyes were dark now. His voice cold. "That was my brother." My throat went dry. Oh, there it was. That connection. That thread that tied us in this sick little knot of coincidence. "I had no idea," I said genuinely. I wasn't even given a name until the end. I just followed the data. He leaned back, folding his arms. "Yeah, well, that data got my brother blacklisted. Couldn't get a job for 8 months. Ended up moving back in with our parents. Everything fell apart. I looked at Melanie, who was now staring at me like I was radioactive. Like I'd poisoned her perfect little dinner with truth. "You ruined someone's life," she said quietly. And something snapped in me. "I did my job," I replied. "Your boyfriend's brother was stealing trade secrets. I didn't frame him. I didn't falsify anything. I traced an IP address. I matched login logs. I cross-referenced security cameras and time-stamped file deletions. That's it. But it didn't matter. In that moment, the mood had turned. I could feel it, like cold air creeping through a cracked window. To them, it didn't matter that I had followed protocol, that I had no clue who Ethan Warren was. All they saw now was me, the outsider, the weirdo who'd suddenly revealed he was more than they assumed. I wasn't just Nate, the guy who brought his own pie and laughed off Uncle Roy's jabs. I was the guy who ruined someone's family, and they hated me for it. The whispers started before dessert was even cleared. I heard my cousin Derek mutter something about snakes in the grass. Aunt Linda kept casting glances at her wine-stained skirt, like I was somehow responsible for her clumsiness. Even my mom, sweet, quiet mom, gave me a look that made my chest ache. It was disappointment. Real, honest-to-God disappointment. Not because I'd done something wrong, but because I'd upset the dynamic. I'd rattled the glass dome that kept our family delusions intact. The rest of the evening passed like a slow-motion car crash. No one asked me about work. No one complimented the pie I baked. No one even thanked me for coming. Carter, meanwhile, was treated like some wounded prince. Aunt Linda brought him fresh apple cider. Grandma asked him about his trauma. Melanie clung to his arm like he was going to evaporate. I stayed until the dishes were half cleared. Then I stood, grabbed my coat, and told Kelly I'd text her later. As I walked toward the door, my father appeared at my side. His voice low. "You know," he said, "maybe next year, just send a card or something." I blinked. "Excuse me." "You're always welcome," he added quickly. "Of course, but maybe a little less drama next time." I stared at him. At the man who, when I was 12, told me I'd never understand people because I spent too much time on computers. The man who once grounded me for fixing the family printer too well because he assumed I must have broken it first. He looked at me like I was the storm that ruined his picnic. And I realized something, standing there in the hallway, coat half-zipped and heart lodged in my throat. They didn't want me here. Not really. They wanted the idea of me, the quiet Nate, the passive Nate, the Nate who ate whatever garbage they fed him, smiled politely, and stayed invisible. But that Nate was gone. Or at least, he was dying. I left without saying goodbye. The drive home was a blur. My phone buzzed a few times. Messages from Kelly, one from my uncle, probably an accidental butt dial, and one from an unknown number. It just said, "Hope you're proud. My brother still can't get work." No name. No signature. Just that. I didn't reply, but I saved the number. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I woke up to a group text from my mom. "Thank you everyone for a beautiful evening. So much love in one house. We are truly blessed." No mention of the wine glass. No mention of the Cold War that had silently unfolded across the table. No mention of me at all. But I noticed something else. A photo attached. It was the family gathered around the dinner table, everyone smiling, glasses raised. Carter had one arm draped around Melanie's shoulder. Even Uncle Roy was mid-laugh. There was one empty chair at the end. Mine. I stared at that photo for a long time. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel hurt. I felt clarity. This family had never really seen me. Not for who I was. They'd seen a placeholder. A scapegoat. A background character in the Melanie show. And for years, I'd accepted that. I'd made peace with being the quiet one. But now I was awake. Now I was done. And if they thought the drama ended with a snide remark and an awkward dinner, they were sorely mistaken. Because I hadn't even started yet. When I woke up the next morning, I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't check my emails or scroll through my messages or see how many comments had piled up in the family group chat. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my hands behind my head, and let the silence sit heavy on my chest. The photo. That cursed photo of everyone smiling around the table, with that one empty chair at the far end. My chair. It kept flashing in my head like a screensaver I couldn't turn off. Part of me wanted to laugh. I mean, what had I really expected? A hero's welcome? A warm hug? "Oh, we're proud of you, Nate." Please. I'd been invisible for so long that even my absence at the table didn't earn a second glance. Just a hole in the photo and a reminder that I didn't belong. But still, it hurt. The deeper cut, though, was Dad's comment. "You're always welcome, but maybe a little less drama next time." That one kept echoing like a looped voicemail in my head. I hadn't brought drama. I hadn't even said anything at dinner. All I'd done was exist, and that alone had been enough to fracture the illusion they worked so hard to maintain. And that's when I realized, I wasn't at rock bottom because of what happened at Thanksgiving. I'd already been at rock bottom for years. I'd just never noticed because I'd gotten comfortable living there. That was the first time in a long while that I actually cried. Not loud, not messy, just tears slipping out quietly while I stared up at the ceiling. Because I wasn't sad for them. I was sad for me, for all the years I'd wasted trying to make people like that see me, respect me, love me, and they never would. Not really. Not unless I stayed in the little box they'd built for me. And I was done shrinking to fit. So that morning, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I pulled out my old whiteboard from the back of the closet, dusted it off, and wrote one word in the middle in all caps. Build. I didn't know what it meant yet. Not fully. But I knew I needed something to ground me. A reason to stop letting other people define my worth. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my work like a man possessed. Not out of spite. Not out of bitterness. But because, for the first time in forever, I realized how much I'd been holding back. Playing small. Avoiding the spotlight out of some twisted loyalty to people who were only ever comfortable when I was beneath them. My consulting firm had been steady for years. I had 4 remote contractors, 2 regular clients, and a couple of passive income projects that brought in just enough to live comfortably. I wasn't flashy. I didn't drive a Tesla. I didn't post motivational quotes on LinkedIn. I just solved problems and got paid for it. But something about Carter, about the way he looked at me when he realized who I was, lit a fire under me. That kind of fear, that kind of recognition, I wanted more of that. Not because I liked being feared, but because it meant I was finally seen. So I started saying yes to things I used to dodge. Bigger contracts, public case studies, a guest podcast appearance on a cybersecurity channel that used to terrify me just thinking about it. I rewrote my company's website from scratch, cleaned up the branding, hired a designer to make it look sleek. I dropped the passive freelancer tone and embraced the fact that I was a business owner. And slowly, things started to shift. By January, I'd landed a massive contract with a fintech company that needed a full audit of their internal systems. It was 6 figures, stretched over 4 months, and required me to hire 2 new people. I brought in Ava, a brilliant XNSA analyst, and Jay, a self-taught wizard from India who could crack any network in 10 minutes flat. We worked long hours, late nights, weekends, but for the first time in years, I loved it. I wasn't hiding anymore, and it wasn't just work. I started doing little things for myself again, stuff I hadn't made time for in years. I took long walks in the evening with a podcast in my ears and the cold air biting at my face. I signed up for cooking classes and learned how to make real ramen. I even joined a local meetup for tech entrepreneurs, even though networking events usually made my skin crawl. That's where I met Elise. She was quiet, sharp, and ran a startup focused on helping nonprofit orgs with digital infrastructure. We bumped into each other at the coffee table during a seminar on client scaling and ended up talking for an hour about how broken email marketing platforms were. We swapped numbers. 2 days later, we got pho. A week after that, we watched bad horror movies on her couch until 2 a.m. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was real and honest and calm. And for a guy who'd grown up in chaos, quiet love felt like revolution. Around March, I got an email that made me pause. It was from Melanie. Just 3 words. Can we talk? I stared at it for 10 full minutes. She hadn't reached out since Thanksgiving. Not even a Merry Christmas. And now this. Against my better judgment, I replied. She called that night. Her voice was softer than I remembered. More unsure. She apologized. Said she'd had time to reflect. That Carter had twisted the story. That maybe she hadn't seen the full picture. That maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been treated fairly by the family. But even as she spoke, I could feel it. The hesitation. The undercurrent of something unspoken. And sure enough, 5 minutes later, she said it. Carter's starting a new business, she said carefully. It's tech-based. Cybersecurity adjacent. He wanted to see if you might advise. I didn't respond right away. Not because I was surprised, but because I was trying to process the sheer audacity. After all that, after the silent treatment, the stares, the betrayal, now I was useful again. I'll think about it, I said flatly. But I already knew the answer. That night, I pulled out the whiteboard again, wrote a new word beneath build. Remember, because I knew myself. I knew how easy it would be to slip back into old patterns, to chase scraps of approval from people who didn't deserve it, to forget the way they made me feel when all I'd done was exist. I wasn't going to let that happen. Not this time. 2 days later, I sent Melanie a polite decline. I told her I was busy, overbooked, couldn't take on new clients. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji. No words. Just that. I laughed when I saw it. And then I got back to work. By April, I tripled my revenue. By May, I was flying to New York to speak on a panel at a tech conference I used to watch on YouTube like a dreamer peeking through glass. And when the family reunion invite showed up in June, signed by Uncle Roy himself, complete with a list of volunteer roles that needed filling, I smiled, folded it neatly, and dropped it in the shredder without a second thought. Because I wasn't done rising. The email came on a Tuesday morning. Subject line, opportunity for collaboration. It was from Carter Warren. I stared at the screen for a long while before opening it. The name alone felt like a ghost creeping through my inbox. After months of silence, after the dinner, the texts, the accusations, he had finally reached out himself. The body of the message was stiffly professional. No, hey Nate. No acknowledgement of our personal history. No reference to Thanksgiving or what had happened between us. Just a brief intro, a summary of his new tech venture, and a polite request to hop on a call and discuss potential synergies. It ended with his Calendly link. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and let it sink in. This wasn't just business. This was strategic. The kind of calculated move someone makes when they realize the only person who can help them is the one they tried to bury 6 months ago. And now? Now they needed me. That's when the idea started to form. Not a full plan yet, just the spark of one. A quiet, glowing ember of possibility. Because here's the thing, I didn't need to ruin Carter. I didn't need to smear his name or dig up dirt or hack his project into oblivion. I just needed to let him talk. And that would be enough. I clicked the link and booked the call. Friday at 3 p.m. The next few days, I started preparing, not just for the meeting, but for something bigger. Something precise. Patient. This wasn't just about Carter anymore. This was about the whole system that had propped him up. The family that had worshipped him instantly while dismissing me for decades. The people who had quietly tolerated my absence but tripped over themselves to accommodate his charm. I wasn't just going to expose him. I was going to use him. But to do that, I needed intel. So I called Kelly. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright. Hey, stranger. You alive? Barely, I joked. Hey, got a weird question. Oh no, she said. Is this going to be one of those family-splitting questions, or a how do you get curry out of a white shirt kind of thing? More like, Carter-related. There was a beat. Then, oof. What now? I explained the email, the proposed collaboration, the complete lack of accountability in his tone. Kelly listened quietly. When I finished, she exhaled sharply. I'm not surprised. You know he's launching that startup, right? Vaguely. Yeah. Well, he's already pitching investors. Melanie keeps posting vague, little humble brags on Instagram. Proud of what he's building. Can't wait to share. That kind of thing. I rolled my eyes. Do we know what the actual product is? Kelly laughed. Something about secure communication? I don't know. Melanie tried explaining it to me at lunch and used the word blockchain 6 times. I think even she doesn't get it. Sounds about right. And he's using family money, I think. Aunt Linda invested. Uncle Roy too. That made my eyebrow twitch. So they were literally investing in him now. I chewed on that. Would you mind? I asked carefully. Keeping an eye on what they post? Anything public. Anything shady. You're planning something. Kelly said immediately. Your voice does this thing when you're scheming. It gets all flat. Maybe, I said. I'm just watching for now. She paused. Do I get to be your sidekick? I grinned. You already are. The call on Friday started off dull. Carter logged in 2 minutes late, his face perfectly lit, his background clean and curated. Probably a rented co-working space with fake books on the shelf behind him. He wore a tailored jacket over a t-shirt, Silicon Valley cosplay at its finest. Nate, he said, nodding. Appreciate you making the time. Sure, I said. Curious what you're working on. He launched into a rehearsed pitch, his voice smooth, confident, practiced. A new app that would revolutionize private communication. Decentralized architecture. End-to-end encryption. AI-enhanced threat detection. All the buzzwords. He name-dropped investors he was in talks with, mentioned a few strategic partners, and casually floated the idea of bringing on someone with a strong forensic background to audit the core security before launch. That someone, obviously, was me. But here's what stuck out. His platform wasn't ready. In fact, it wasn't even built. He was pitching wireframes and vaporware, just a glossy deck and a few UI mockups. The backend wasn't done. The encryption libraries were open source, with no custom implementation. And the AI threat detection? Pure fantasy at this stage. I kept my face neutral the whole time. When he finished, I asked a few questions, basic ones, deliberately naive. He answered confidently, but his replies were vague, non-technical. He didn't understand the infrastructure he was claiming to build, which meant one thing: he was lying to someone, either the investors, the family, or both. After 30 minutes, we wrapped. "I'll think about it," I told him. "Appreciate the walkthrough." "Of course," he said, smiling. "Would love to have someone like you on the team." As the call ended, I took a screenshot of the deck he'd shared on screen, just a glimpse, but enough to trace. Over the next week, I began digging. Quietly, carefully, using the few details from the deck and the company name he'd dropped, CipherSet. I found their website. It was sleek but hollow, full of aspirational language and empty promises. I ran a WHOS lookup on the domain, registered to a shell company in Delaware. Classic. Then I searched public business registries. Carter wasn't listed as a founder. Some guy named Victor Harper was. A name I didn't recognize. I dug deeper. Victor Harper had 2 other LLCs, both dissolved. One had been investigated for securities fraud. Quietly. No charges filed. I started connecting the dots. This wasn't just a tech bro with a dream. This was a puppet. Or worse, a front. And Carter? He was either clueless or complicit. Either way, it was gold. By the end of the month, I'd assembled a neat little folder of everything I'd found: investor slides, fake metrics, registration details, and even a few public testimonials on the website that, when reverse image searched, turned out to be AI-generated headshots. I had the kindling. Now I needed the match. That's when Kelly came through again. She texted me a screenshot from Melanie's Instagram. It was a boomerang video of champagne flutes clinking over a caption that read, "Celebrating our seed round. $350K raised, and just getting started." That was the confirmation I needed. They weren't just talking to investors anymore. They had funding, and they were using that funding based on false claims, fake prototypes, and fake endorsements. Legally, that was a minefield. I consulted a lawyer I knew, a discreet, brilliant guy named Marco I'd worked with during the Linton job. I told him I had a client who might be exposed to an investment built on deceptive materials. I didn't name names. I just asked what the reporting thresholds were. Marco didn't even hesitate. If someone's misrepresenting their product to raise money, and you can prove it, you have enough to go to the SEC or even the FTC, depending on the scale. Investors can sue for damages. Founders can be held liable. I nodded slowly. Even if it's just family and friends investing, doesn't matter. Fraud is fraud. I thanked him. Then I called Kelly again. "I need names," I said. "Everyone in the family who's put money into CipherSet." She didn't ask why, just said, "Give me a day." When she got back to me, the list was longer than I expected. Uncle Roy, $50,000. Aunt Linda, $35,000. Grandma, even $10,000. One of our cousins, $25,000 from his college fund. They'd all bet on Carter, and none of them knew they were holding a grenade. I didn't feel smug. I didn't feel angry. I felt ready. I wasn't going to ruin Carter out of spite. I was going to shine a light on the truth. Let the consequences fall where they may. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting. I was strategizing. And the next move was mine. I didn't confront anyone right away. That was the hardest part, sitting on the truth while everyone around me strutted, bragged, and congratulated themselves. Melanie kept posting updates about late nights and building something meaningful. Aunt Linda shared an article about women supporting startups, tagging Carter and adding a heart. Uncle Roy told anyone who would listen that he'd finally invested in something that mattered. And I let them. Because the thing about truth is, it doesn't need theatrics. It just needs timing. The moment came sooner than I expected. In early July, I got an email invitation that made me laugh out loud. CipherSet was hosting a friends and family progress night. A casual showcase. Light demos. Drinks. Networking. Melanie forwarded it to me with a chirpy note. "You should come. Carter would love to show you what they've built." That line, "what they've built," sealed it. I replied yes. Not because I wanted to reconcile. Not because I wanted approval. But because this was the cleanest way to end it. The event was held in a rented event space downtown, all exposed brick and hanging lights. The kind of place that looked impressive in photos and hollow in reality. There was a banner with Cypher Set's logo printed far too large for the room, a folding table with branded pamphlets, and a monitor looping the same animated mock-up over and over. I arrived 10 minutes early. Carter spotted me immediately. His smile froze for half a second before snapping back into place. He walked over, hand outstretched, voice booming like we were old friends. "Nate, glad you could make it." I shook his hand. Calm, polite, wouldn't miss it. Melanie hugged me next. Too tight, too rehearsed. "I'm really glad you're here," she said, as if that erased months of silence. "Me too," I replied. The room filled quickly. Family, a few local business people, and, this surprised me, 2 men in suits who definitely weren't relatives. One of them was Victor Harper. I recognized him immediately from my research. Same face, same slick confidence, same eyes that never quite settled on anyone. Carter took the stage around 7. He gave a speech about vision, trust, and the future of privacy. He talked about integrity, about doing things the right way. I watched Uncle Roy nod along, arms crossed, proud. Aunt Linda dabbed at her eyes like she was watching a graduation. When Carter finished, the room applauded. Glasses clinked. Music came back on. Then Carter said, "And now, we're going to do a brief live walkthrough of our security framework. Nate here has been advising us informally, and he's agreed to say a few words." That was new. Melanie turned to me, eyes wide. "What?" I stood up slowly. Carter smiled at me, the same smile he'd worn at Thanksgiving. Confident. Certain. He thought he'd put me on the spot. Thought I'd freeze or deflect or play small like I always used to. Instead, I stepped forward. "Thanks, Carter," I said evenly. "I actually haven't advised Cypher Set. But since everyone's here, I think it's a good time to clarify a few things." The room quieted. I plugged a flash drive into the monitor. The screen changed. Instead of Cypher Set's looping animation, a simple slide appeared. "Let's start with the basics," I said. "This platform claims end-to-end encryption. It does not. It uses an unmodified open-source library with known vulnerabilities, last patched 18 months ago." Murmurs. Carter stiffened. "Nate, this isn't." I raised a hand. "I'm not finished." Next slide. "These user testimonials? Generated. Stock photos. Reverse searchable." Another slide. "These performance metrics? Projections presented as current data. That's misrepresentation." Victor Harper shifted uncomfortably. I kept going. Calm. Precise. No insults. No emotion. I explained the shell company. The dissolved LLCs. The lack of a working backend. The absence of any proprietary security architecture. Then I turned to the room. If you invested in Cypher Set based on these claims, you were not given accurate information. Silence. Aunt Linda looked at Uncle Roy. Uncle Roy looked at Melanie. Grandma's hands trembled in her lap. Carter finally snapped. "This is a personal attack." "No," I said. "This is documentation." Victor stepped forward then, trying to take control. "We can explain." "That won't be necessary," said one of the men in suits. He stood, pulling out a badge. "SEC," he said simply. "We've been reviewing Cypher Set for a few weeks. This presentation confirms several concerns." The room erupted. Questions. Gasps. Someone dropped a glass. Melanie looked like she'd been slapped. Carter went pale. Victor started talking fast. Too fast. The agents asked for documents. Phones. Laptops. I stepped back, letting it unfold without me. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just watched the truth do what it always does when it finally gets air. The fallout was swift. Cypher Set's accounts were frozen, pending investigation. Investors were notified. Lawyers got involved. Victor disappeared within a week. Carter was left holding the wreckage. Family group chats exploded. Uncle Roy called me 23 times. I didn't answer. Aunt Linda left a voicemail crying, asking how I could do this to family. Melanie showed up at my apartment unannounced, eyes red, voice shaking. "You humiliated us." I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something close to peace. "I didn't humiliate you," I said. "I told the truth. You just weren't ready to hear it." She left without another word. The investigations dragged on for months. Some money was recovered. Some wasn't. Relationships fractured. Blame bounced around like a pinball. And me? I went back to my life. Work flourished. My firm grew. Elise stayed. Kelly stayed. The people who mattered didn't question my choices. They understood them. Thanksgiving came around again. I didn't get an invite. I didn't need one. Because for the first time, I wasn't the quiet one at the end of the table. I wasn't the punchline. I wasn't invisible. I was just finally free. My name's Adrian, and I'm 27 years old. If you asked anyone in my family to describe me, they'd probably mumble something vague. He's quiet. Or, he works with computers or something. Not exactly glowing testimonials, right? That's been my life, though. The quiet one, the background character, the one who doesn't cause problems, but somehow never quite gets the spotlight either. I used to think it was my fault, that maybe I just wasn't the kind of person worth paying attention to. But over time, I started noticing a pattern where no matter how hard I worked, how much I helped out, how many times I showed up, I was always just overlooked. It was worse with my younger brother, Zach. He's 24, and he's everything I'm not, at least in my parents' eyes. Loud, confident, charming. The golden child since the day he was born. Every time he brought home a B+, my mom would post it on Facebook like he'd just discovered a new planet. Meanwhile, when I quietly graduated from university with a double major, computer science and digital media, both done while working 2 part-time jobs, my parents didn't even bring it up during dinner. Not once. No congratulations, no card, no acknowledgement. I remember sitting there at the table, hoping someone would say something. Anything. But Zach had just gotten a new job at some PR firm downtown, and that took over the whole conversation. I smiled and nodded and congratulated him like a good older brother. I always do. That moment stuck with me. But I let it go, like I always do. I had more important things to focus on anyway. I'd finally enrolled in a master's program. A big deal, since I was the first in our family to even go beyond undergrad, and I was balancing it with a full-time job in UX design. It was hard, lonely sometimes, but it felt good to build something of my own, something I could be proud of even if nobody noticed. I didn't expect a parade. I didn't even expect applause. But I did think, maybe, when I finished my program in May, they'd come to my graduation ceremony. Maybe. Then last month, my Aunt Lisa called. She sounded bubbly, chipper, the way she always does when she's about to ask a favor. Adrian, sweetie, just wanted to check. Are you free on the 10th? Zach's having his graduation dinner at that new steakhouse downtown. Your mom and dad are organizing it. Should be a blast. I blinked, confused. The 10th? Wait, nobody told me about this. Lisa paused, awkward for a beat. Oh, huh. I figured they would have. Maybe it slipped their minds. Right. So I call my dad. Just straightforward, no drama. I asked about the dinner. He didn't even pretend to be surprised. Oh, he said casually. Yeah, we didn't think you'd want to come. I mean, you barely finished school yourself, right? Figured you wouldn't be interested in all the academic stuff. It hit me like a slap, even though it wasn't new. Just louder this time. And that little laugh in his voice, like he was making some joke I should laugh along with. I didn't. I just said, okay, then don't worry about my ceremony next month. There was silence on the other end, then a dismissive, suit yourself. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just hung up. For a few days, I stewed in silence. I didn't tell anyone what he said. I kept going to work, kept writing my thesis, kept helping my roommate fix his car after work and replying to Slack messages at 11 p.m. like nothing had happened. But inside, something had changed. I wasn't angry, at least not in the way I used to be. I wasn't hurt. I was done. Done trying to prove anything to people who refused to see me. Done being their quiet, reliable afterthought. So I started planning. Not revenge, exactly. Just clarity. Visibility. I wanted the truth to be visible, even if they didn't want to see it. 2 weeks later, Zach's graduation dinner happened without me, just like they planned. I heard all about it from Instagram. My cousin Chloe posted photos of the whole night. Zach holding up some giant bottle of champagne, my parents laughing in the background, my Aunt Lisa doing that dramatic wine toast thing she always does. In one picture, Zach was leaning back in his chair while everyone clapped for him. It had 117 likes. The next morning, I woke up, showered, and checked my inbox. The final confirmation was there. My graduation ceremony had been scheduled and approved. I'd be walking the stage in exactly 3 weeks. I opened the attached guest form. You could invite up to 8 people. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed in every name that mattered. My best friend from high school, who'd stuck by me when I was going through my worst depression. My thesis advisor, who had actually read my entire 80-page paper and sent notes with smiley faces in the margins. My roommate, who'd cooked for me during finals week. My neighbor, Mr. Chun, who always asked how my classes were going and actually listened to the answers. I left my parents' names off the list. I didn't tell them. I didn't announce anything. I didn't post a countdown on Facebook or send out a family group text. I just lived my life. Then the day came. It was warm, sunny. The ceremony was held outdoors on the university lawn. There were white folding chairs and bright blue banners with the school's crest. My name was called near the end, and I walked across the stage with my head high and my eyes forward. I didn't look around to see who was or wasn't there. I just smiled, shook hands, and took my diploma. Afterward, we took pictures. Laughing, sweaty, squinting in the sun. Chloe, my cousin, snapped a selfie with me and uploaded it almost instantly. But she didn't just post the photo. She added a location tag, too, and a caption. "Proud of you, Adrian, finally getting the recognition you deserve." In the background of the picture was a banner, big, blue, and impossible to miss. It was stretched across the brick wall behind the stage and read, "Congratulations, Adrian Singh, Master of Science in UX and Digital Strategy." My face was on it. Literally. A blown-up, smiling photo of me from our undergrad graduation 4 years ago. My advisor had submitted it as part of the Student Spotlight feature, and the school had turned it into a full banner. Everyone at the ceremony saw it. Everyone in the photo saw it. And apparently, so did my mom. Because 3 hours later, I had 4 missed calls from her. 2 from my dad. 1 from Zach. All in rapid succession. A voicemail too. Just my mom saying, "Adrian, why didn't you tell us?" before it cut off. That was just the beginning. But it was enough to make me finally exhale. The first thing I did after reading the voicemail was put my phone face down on the nightstand and walk into the kitchen. My roommate, Sam, was making celebratory pancakes. He had a thing for breakfast food during milestones, said it made everything feel more grounded. I laughed, sat at the counter, and sipped coffee while the batter sizzled on the pan. He raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" I shrugged. They found out. He didn't have to ask who they were. Sam had seen enough of the stories to understand the dynamics. My family didn't hate me. That would have been easier. They just ignored me. Or worse, undermined me with a smile, like they were doing me a favor by doubting me. And now, they were calling because the rest of the world had noticed something they didn't. By noon, I had 10 missed calls. Then texts. A family group chat that I hadn't opened in months suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree. "Mom, Adrian, why didn't you tell us about today? We would have come." "Dad, you're being dramatic. We didn't know it was such a big deal." "Zach, dude, everyone's talking about that banner. Even Aunt Priya saw it. You could have said something." I didn't respond. Not right away. I watched the texts pile up while I sat in the backyard with Sam and my neighbor Mr. Chun, who came over to drop off homemade almond cookies and ended up staying to celebrate. We sat around with paper plates, congratulating each other like old friends. Mr. Chun told me stories about when he worked in electrical engineering in the 80s. Sam made a terrible joke about UX designers being the unsung heroes of online rage, and I just soaked it all in. It wasn't until late that night, around 11:30, that I finally picked up the phone. I called my mom. 1 ring. 2. Then she answered, her voice immediately too soft, too sugary. "Adrian," she said. "Honey, we were so surprised to see the post from Chloe. I didn't even know you were graduating today." I didn't say anything right away. I let the silence stretch, just long enough to be uncomfortable. "Why wouldn't you tell us?" she asked again, sounding genuinely confused. I finally spoke. "You didn't tell me about Zach's dinner." "That's different," she said quickly. "We thought you might not want to go." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. "And you thought I wouldn't want you at my graduation?" Silence. Then, "Well, if you wanted us there, you should have." I did. For years. That shut her up. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't crying. I was just stating facts, calmly, plainly, like I was writing an email at work. "I invited you to my undergrad ceremony. You said you had a golf tournament. I showed you my thesis, and you changed the subject to Zach's new girlfriend. Every time I tried to tell you something I was proud of, you redirected the conversation to him." She sputtered. "That's not fair." "It's true." I paused, letting her sit with that. "I didn't invite you today because I didn't want another memory with you not looking up from your phone or smiling politely while you asked when I was going to do something real. I never said that. she said, suddenly defensive. That's not how I meant it. But it's how it felt. We were quiet again. Then she asked, more gently this time, is this what you want, Adrian? To cut us out completely? Over one missed dinner. I almost laughed again. The dinner. That's all they ever saw. The surface-level moments. Never the build-up, the patterns, the slow erosion of self-worth after years of being treated like a footnote. No, I said. I don't want to cut anyone out. But I do want you to understand that I'm not your second-place child. I'm not the understudy in Zach's life story. More silence. Then she muttered, I just wish you would have told us how much it meant to you. I exhaled through my nose. I did. You just didn't listen. I hung up before she could answer. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was upset, but because something inside me was shifting, something that had been twisted and suppressed for years. I wasn't just mad anymore. I wasn't sad. I was free. But I wasn't done. The next morning, I sent out a few emails. Nothing petty, just formal requests. I reached out to the university's digital media department, where I'd done my assistantship, and asked if they'd be interested in featuring my thesis project, which had already gotten attention from a couple tech blogs. They said yes, of course. Then I asked if they'd consider naming the next graduate student grant after my late grandmother, the only person in my family who'd believed in me unconditionally. She'd passed when I was 16, but I still remembered how she'd tell me, one day, they'll see you. By Thursday, the university's social media had posted a photo of me presenting my project. Captioned, Alumnus Adrian Singh revolutionizes student UX models. Full spotlight on our site. It got shared hundreds of times. And that's when the calls really started. From family members I hadn't spoken to in years. From cousins who suddenly remembered that I existed. From my mom again, and my dad too, both alternating between pride and guilt, trying to find a middle ground where they could pretend they'd supported me all along. I didn't block them. I didn't explode. I just didn't reply. But then something happened that forced me to respond. Zach showed up. He was waiting outside my building on Saturday afternoon. Hoodie on, hands in his pockets, leaning against the brick like he owned the place. When I stepped out with a bag of groceries, I almost didn't recognize him. Hey, he said, pushing off the wall. I nodded. Hey, you really weren't going to tell me? Would you have come? He opened his mouth, then shut it. Look, man, I get it. I do. They always compared us. And I know that sucked. But that's not on me. I raised an eyebrow. No? You didn't mind the praise, though? Never once said, actually, Adrian helped me with that project, or Adrian's graduating too. You were happy to take it all and let me disappear. Zach looked genuinely uncomfortable. I didn't think it mattered that much to you. And that's the problem. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. So what now? You gonna cut us all off forever? No, I said. I'm going to keep doing what I've always done, working hard, being proud of what I build. But from now on, I'm not going to sit quietly while everyone else takes credit or makes me feel small. Zach nodded slowly. Okay, that's fair. He started to walk away, but turned back once. For what it's worth, the banner was pretty cool. I smirked. Thanks. He left, and I stood there for a long time, the grocery bag in one hand, the city humming around me. And then, I got the email that would change everything. The email came from an unfamiliar address at first glance. I assumed it was spam and almost deleted it. But then I saw the subject line. Your thesis caught our eye. Let's talk. I clicked it open, heart thudding a little harder than I expected. Inside, it was short and professional. Hi, Adrian. I recently came across your UX and digital strategy thesis while researching student-led design innovations. Your work on interface empathy and user-centered frameworks was not only sharp, but deeply resonant with what our firm is exploring for an upcoming partnership project. We're currently assembling a task force for a high-profile campaign, and I'd love to set up a meeting if you're open to discussing potential collaboration. Timing is tight, so please let us know by next week if you're available. Looking forward. Camille Ross, Executive Strategy Director. I read it 3 times. Then I stood up and walked around the apartment for 5 full minutes, muttering things like, is this real? And no way, under my breath. Camille Ross. I'd read her article on UI innovation just 2 months ago. She was one of the top minds in the field. Her firm had contracts with both Tesla and the Smithsonian. And somehow they had found me. I forwarded the email to my advisor with a question mark in the subject line. She replied 10 minutes later. Yes, this is real. Take the meeting. And just like that, The narrative started shifting, not just in my head, but tangibly, visibly. The kid who barely finished school was being headhunted by one of the top firms in the country. Still, I didn't tell my family. I wasn't interested in their approval anymore. I wasn't chasing a pat on the head. This wasn't for them. But, of course, the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Because 3 days later, I got a message from my mom. It was a screenshot of my photo, me standing next to Camille, smiling in front of the Future Form logo. The school's media team had posted it on their official LinkedIn. From thesis to thought leader, how Adrian Singh is redefining digital empathy. My mom's message said, simply, "Why are we finding out about this from the internet?" I didn't reply, not to that one. But later that night, I got a longer text from my dad. It wasn't angry or dismissive or laced with backhanded compliments like usual. It was apologetic. Almost. "Son, I think I owe you an apology. Maybe more than one. I didn't realize how much I'd overlooked. We were wrong not to be there. I was wrong not to see you for who you are." I stared at the message for a long time. Typed out 4 different responses. Deleted them all. Then, finally, I wrote back, "Thank you for saying that. I'm not angry anymore. But I won't pretend the past didn't happen." He didn't reply. Not that night. Not the next morning. But something had shifted. Still, all of that was just the undercurrent. Because what happened the following weekend brought everything to the surface. It started with an unexpected phone call from Aunt Priya, of all people. She never called. Ever. She was my dad's older sister, retired now, the type of woman who wore pearls to the grocery store and corrected your grammar mid-sentence. "Adrian," she said curtly, "I think it's time we had a proper conversation." I braced myself, but what she said next took the air right out of my lungs. "I saw the article," she continued, "and I want to speak candidly. Your parents have always favored Zach. It's been obvious since you were children. I told them so more than once." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't even known she noticed. "They made excuses," she said. "Said you were different. Quiet. Too sensitive. But I've watched from the sidelines long enough. And I'm done staying silent." I sat down at the kitchen table. My hands were shaking. "There's a family trust being discussed," she said carefully. "You're supposed to be part of it. But the way things are going, I wouldn't be surprised if your name suddenly disappeared from the papers." My heart dropped. "What do you mean?" "I mean, they've already been talking about giving Zach power of attorney over your father's side. I found out yesterday." I felt the blood drain from my face. I'd never even heard about this trust before. "I thought you should know," she said. "Because it's not fair. And you deserve better." After the call, I sat for a long time with my phone in my hand and my pulse roaring in my ears. All the late nights, the swallowed pain, the years of being sidelined, and now, when I was finally standing tall, they were quietly preparing to erase me again. No, not this time. I opened my laptop and began drafting an email. Not to my parents. Not to Zach. To a lawyer. I still hadn't said a word to them about what I knew. I didn't need to. Not yet. I wanted to make sure everything was documented, airtight, undeniable. Because this time, I wasn't walking away. This time, they were going to have to see me, every part of me. Especially the part they tried so hard to ignore. I spent the next week in a haze of legal calls, quiet research, and old emails I never thought I'd need again. Every Christmas receipt, every screenshot of conversations where I was guilt-tripped into giving Zach money, just for a bit. Every time I paid the property taxes on the lake house that apparently was never going to be in my name, I dug it all up. It was exhausting, infuriating, but also weirdly satisfying. Like every piece of proof made my reality just a little more solid. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining the favoritism. I'd been quietly funding a narrative that painted me as the lesser son. My lawyer, Diane, sharp, calm, and relentless, walked me through every step. "They can't remove you from a trust that includes your name without a challenge," she explained. "But they can try to shift authority, especially if Zach's been named as a future executor or if any part of it wasn't properly updated. You need to get ahead of this." And I did. We filed for full access to the trust records, citing financial interest and recent activity that raised red flags. I authorized a full audit, which triggered formal notice to both of my parents. That was when the silence ended. I was at work the next morning when my phone started vibrating every 10 minutes. First my mom, then my dad, then Zach. Then a barrage of texts. "Mom, Adrian, what are you doing? You're blowing things out of proportion. Dad, you really got a lawyer involved? Why would you do this to us? Zach, bro, a trust audit? You're making it look like we're criminals. They weren't. Not technically, but they weren't innocent either. Later that night, my mom left a voicemail, her voice brittle. We never meant to hurt you. But you have to understand, things were easier with Zach. He needed more. You were always so independent. There it was. The excuse. The thing I'd heard my whole life. That because I didn't scream for attention, I didn't need love. That being self-sufficient meant I didn't deserve celebration. That voicemail was the last straw. I didn't reply. Not yet. I waited until Diane's team finished their review. What we found was a tangled mess of estate plans, all drafted hastily over the years, but clear enough in one regard. My grandfather had left equal shares of a future property development to both grandsons. It had sat dormant for years. But recently, my father and uncle had begun planning to liquidate the land and had listed Zach as the sole inheritor. I had documentation. I had emails. And now, I had leverage. We filed a formal challenge to the title change and sent out cease and desist letters to both my father and uncle regarding any development until the inheritance dispute was resolved. And then, I made it public. Not in a petty way. I didn't post it all over Facebook or start some war online. Instead, I gave a talk, an invited presentation at the university's upcoming alumni summit. My topic? The cost of being overlooked, personal identity, and professional visibility. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. I spoke candidly, not naming names, but telling my story. About the years I spent proving myself to a family that only clapped for one son. About what it meant to constantly earn but never receive. About the strength it took to stop waiting and start acting. There were 200 people in that auditorium. One of them was Chloe, my cousin, who came up to me afterward with tears in her eyes. I wish I'd noticed earlier, she said. Another was Aunt Priya. She didn't say anything, just hugged me so tightly I couldn't breathe. A week later, the university's media department published the full transcript online. It spread like wildfire through the alumni network. Faculty emailed me. Former classmates shared it. The talk was picked up by a podcast. And then, someone forwarded it to my parents. I didn't know they'd listen to it until a Sunday afternoon, when I got a knock at my apartment door. I opened it and found my dad standing there, hands in his pockets, looking older than I remembered. My mom was behind him, holding a box. They came in, sat quietly on the couch. My roommate, sensing the tension, made himself scarce. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then my dad cleared his throat. We didn't see things clearly. We see them now. My mom placed the box on the coffee table. Inside were dozens of old photographs, school projects, even some awards I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. We kept them, she said, but we never knew how to show we were proud of you. I looked at the box. It didn't fix anything. It didn't erase what happened, but it was something. Then my dad said the thing I never thought I'd hear. We're putting everything on hold. The trust, the sale, until this is resolved the right way. I nodded. That's all I ever wanted. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It wasn't perfect. There was no sweeping apology that fixed decades of erasure. But there was acknowledgement. There was movement. And there was, finally, equity. The audit concluded in my favor. The trust was amended to reflect the original intent, equal shares. I opted to invest mine into a new foundation supporting first-gen students pursuing design. I named it after my grandmother. Zach and I aren't close. We probably never will be. But he sent a donation to the foundation without saying a word. And that, somehow, meant more than any phone call. My parents didn't suddenly transform, but they started showing up. Quietly, authentically. And me? I moved forward. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Because sometimes the real revenge isn't shouting louder. It's being undeniable. It's becoming so visible that they can never again pretend you weren't there. And that's exactly what I did. My name's Aaron, I'm 34, and for the past 7 years, I've been what my family calls the reliable one. You know the type, pays on time, answers calls, shows up when someone's in the hospital, takes care of the chaos behind the scenes so no one else has to. I never asked for that role, never volunteered. But I fell into it the way most eldest siblings do, one missed bill at a time, one hey, could you cover this just once at a time. Eventually, it wasn't a favor anymore. It was expected, and I let it slide for a long time, mostly because it was easier than fighting with them. Until last weekend. My nephew Tyler turned 10. He's a sweet kid, funny, smart, a little quiet around crowds, but lights up when he's around animals. I adore him. Every year, I go out of my way to make sure his birthday's something special, especially since my sister, Jenna, and her husband, Travis, have a habit of planning late and spending even later. Last year, they tried to book a venue the week of the party. It got canceled the night before. I ended up reserving a backup indoor trampoline park out of pocket, $600, just to keep the kids from being crushed with disappointment. They never paid me back, not even a thank you card. This year, I prepaid the venue again, an animal petting farm Tyler had mentioned once in passing. I remembered because he'd lit up when he talked about goats, and I figured, why not? I also chipped in for the cake, the food truck, the rented tables and chairs, none of which Jenna asked for directly, of course. She just texted me things like, "We'll need more chairs. Can you take care of that?" Or food trucks asking for deposit. Should I give them your info? I handled it, because I didn't want Tyler to suffer because his parents were flaky. But something had been building in me lately. A pressure. A quiet, cold realization that I wasn't appreciated, just used. And I think I knew, deep down, that this party was going to be the last straw. It started off fine. The kids were running around the yard, the goats were bleeding, and Tyler looked genuinely happy, which almost made it worth it. Almost. I tried to stay out of the way, helped set up some tables, tipped the food truck guy a little extra, handed out water bottles. Then came cake time. Everyone gathered near the patio where Jenna had set up a folding table for the desserts. She had on one of those boho maxi dresses, all flowy and bright, like she was auditioning for some Instagram parenting reel. Travis stood behind her with his usual smirk, nursing a plastic cup of soda and acting like he'd done anything to earn this moment. Jenna cut the cake, passed a few pieces to the kids, and then turned to me with a tight smile. "Here," she said, handing me a slice. "Least I can do, since you're always buying your way into being the favorite." I blinked. "What?" She laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "You know, buying stuff doesn't make you special, Aaron. You're just the family wallet. That's all you've ever been." Travis chuckled like she'd just said something wildly clever. "It's true, man. Gotta admit, it's convenient. You always swoop in and save the day." I stood there for a second, holding that stupid plate of cake, looking between them. My mom was a few feet away, fussing with napkins. She glanced over, heard enough to know what was going on, and muttered without looking up, "Let it go, Aaron. It's not worth it. Not today. Let it go." The same words I'd heard when they borrowed my car and returned it with a busted bumper. When they accidentally used my Amazon account to order a $900 iPad for Tyler's school. When Travis lost his job for the third time, and I co-signed a private school loan because Tyler deserves better. Let it go. Let it go. Let it go. I looked down at the cake, then over at the gift table where a large white envelope sat, my envelope. Inside was a certified check, final payment on Tyler's next semester at that private academy. They hadn't thanked me. They hadn't even told Tyler it was from me. I overheard Jenna telling someone it was a family gift. I placed the plate gently on the table, walked over to the gift pile, picked up the envelope. "What are you doing?" Jenna asked, half laughing, half confused. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just said, clear enough for her, Travis, and anyone else nearby to hear, "Good luck covering next semester. I just canceled the payment." She blinked, stunned. "What?" I turned and started walking. "You can't just do that," she shouted, a note of panic creeping into her voice. "Aaron, you promised." "I never promised," I said, not looking back. "You assumed. Big difference." I made it halfway down the gravel driveway before I heard footsteps pounding behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Travis. And I knew, just knew, that whatever he was about to say wasn't going to be an apology. He caught up to me near the gate, slightly out of breath, red-faced. "Hey, come on, man. Don't do this. We're family." I paused at the word. Family. The word they all threw around like duct tape, meant to patch over every insult, every manipulation, every broken promise. I turned slowly. Travis stood there, hands on his hips like he was about to give a pep talk. I could see him trying to puff himself up, shoulders square, chin high, the same way he'd looked when he cornered me at Thanksgiving to ask for a small bridge loan that turned out to be 15 grand. He wasn't angry yet, just desperate enough to pretend we were on the same team. "Look," he said, dropping his voice like we were co-conspirators. "I know Jen says stuff sometimes, but you know how she gets when she's stressed. It's not personal, man. Not personal? I raised an eyebrow. She called me a wallet. She was joking. No. You laughed because you agreed. He opened his mouth to protest, but I stepped forward, not aggressive, just close enough that he had to take a half step back. You think I don't notice? I asked. The way you only call when you need something? The way you both talk about me like I'm some backup generator that kicks in when you mess up? His face twitched. The casual mask cracked for just a second. That tuition payment. I added. I made it last week. Then I canceled it right before I left the party. The school's already been notified. They'll expect full payment by the end of the month. His lips parted, stunned. You can't. Tyler needs that school. I nodded. Yeah, he does. And it's a shame his parents were too busy running their mouths to realize the person keeping him there was standing right in front of them. He reached out suddenly, maybe to grab my arm, maybe just to make a point, but I stepped back. Don't, I said sharply. We're done, Travis. I'm not paying another bill. Not a penny. Not for school, not for rent, not for emergencies. You're a grown man. Figure it out. He dropped his hand, eyes flicking around like he was expecting someone to run out and back him up. But no one did. Behind us, the music from the party was still playing faintly, and the laughter of kids echoed across the yard. He looked like a man standing outside a locked house in the rain. You know, he muttered bitterly, it must be nice. Having money. Must be real easy looking down on everyone else when you've never had to struggle. That hit a nerve. I worked 70-hour weeks. I snapped. I skipped vacations, skipped relationships, skipped entire years of my life so I could build something. You think I'm lucky? You think this? I waved a hand toward the driveway, toward the new car parked at the end, just fell into my lap? While you were sleeping in and job hopping, I was eating tuna from a can and coding websites in a basement at 3 a.m. Travis went quiet. Not ashamed, just quiet. His jaw clenched, but there was no comeback this time. I'm not mad that you needed help, I said, my voice lowering. I'm mad that you took it for granted. That Jenna made a speech about how we paid for everything. That your kid doesn't even know who really kept the lights on. He looked away. Tell her I'm done. I finished. Tell your wife that the wallet just closed. I turned and walked away, passing the long row of parked cars. I could hear him still standing there, but he didn't follow. When I got into my car and shut the door, the silence hit me harder than I expected. No one had ever chased after me before. Not when I left family dinners early. Not when I stopped texting back for a week. Not even when I skipped Father's Day after Mom told me I owed it to the family to make peace with Dad after he called me a disappointment. I sat there, engine off, hands on the wheel, just breathing. It wasn't just about the money. It never was. It was about being needed only when I could be used. About feeling like the price of being accepted was measured in wire transfers and gift receipts. And I had finally hit my limit. My phone buzzed. Jenna. First it was a missed call. Then a text. What did you do? Tyler's crying. The school called. You're ruining everything. I stared at it for a second. Then another one came in. Come back and fix this. You're being ridiculous. And another. If you don't care about us, at least think about Tyler. Then a call from my mom. I let it ring. 10 seconds later, a message popped up. You need to apologize. We don't treat family like this. I laughed. Out loud. Alone in the car. I typed back. Exactly. I hit send. Then turned the key, started the car, and pulled away from the party I'd paid for but wasn't invited to anymore. I didn't know what would come next. I knew they'd panic. That there would be voicemails and guilt trips and maybe even a surprise visit or two. But I was done pretending. And I hadn't even gotten to step 2 yet. By the time I pulled into my driveway, it was almost sunset. The sky was that weird orange-pink that made everything look soft, like the world had decided to put a filter over my mess of a day. I parked in silence, engine humming down, and just sat there with my phone still lit up in my hand. More missed calls. A few voicemails. One from Jenna that started with a fake sweet, I just want to talk, and ended with a hissed, you're unbelievable. Another from Mom, long and guilt-laced, talking about how families don't keep score. I didn't delete them. I didn't even listen to all of them. I just closed the app, shoved my phone into the glove compartment, and locked the car. I didn't want to go inside right away. My place was nice, quiet, clean mine, but the silence in there was heavier than usual. It had always been that way after family events. The noise would drain out, and I'd be left alone with that old ache. The one that whispered maybe I really wasn't built for all that warmth and chaos. That maybe I was only ever invited to keep things functioning. But today, for the first time, the ache felt different. It felt honest. I took the long way around the house, walking through my backyard instead of the front door. I'd landscaped it myself a few years ago, laid the stones, built the tiny deck, strung up soft solar lights that flicked on automatically as the sun dipped. I poured a glass of water from the outdoor tap, sat in one of the wooden chairs, and just listened to the wind for a while. I thought about Tyler. I really did. Not Jenna. Not Travis. Not even Mom. Just Tyler. That kid deserved better parents. But more than that, he deserved the truth. Not some version of reality they cobbled together to make themselves look good. He was smart. He'd figure it out eventually. I just hoped he wouldn't be too jaded when he did. Eventually, I stood up and went inside. That's when I opened the drawer in my office and pulled out the second envelope. The one Jenna and Travis didn't know existed. The one I'd prepared after they forgot to reimburse me for the last medical emergency, when Tyler broke his arm and they claimed they weren't covered anymore. Inside the envelope were receipts, contracts, and a neat little spreadsheet tracking every dime I'd spent on their family since 2019. It included everything: school fees, hospital bills, party rentals, car repairs, groceries, even the hotel room I booked for them during a hurricane evacuation they didn't bother to thank me for. In total, it came out to $61,437.88, give or take a few cents. But that wasn't the important part. The important part was the email I'd scheduled to go out that morning. Not to them. No, that would have been too easy. It went to the school administrator, the financial aid director, and one of my old college friends who now worked for the school's board. The email simply explained that I was no longer associated with Tyler's tuition, but I was deeply concerned that he might suffer academically due to his parents' financial misrepresentation. It offered to send a full breakdown of prior payments under my name, as well as to provide contact information for someone who could verify the circumstances. That friend, he'd already replied, hours before the party even started. Thanks for the heads up. This explains a lot. I'll have a word with the director. Also, wow, they really did this to you. I replied back with a smiley face and the line, long story. I'll buy you coffee next week. I didn't want to take anything from Tyler. That wasn't my goal. But if Travis and Jenna were going to keep pretending the world owed them for their failures, someone had to break the pattern. I couldn't keep covering for them while they taught that kid to do the same thing. So I took the envelope, scanned everything in, and dropped it into a shared folder labeled "For when they lie again." I didn't know when I'd use it. Maybe never. Maybe next week. But it was there, and it felt like armor. The next day, the storm really hit. Jenna showed up at my place around 11 a.m. uninvited, of course. I watched her from the upstairs window before she even rang the bell. She was pacing on the front step like she wasn't sure whether to scream or cry. Eventually, she knocked. I waited 5 seconds, then 10, then opened the door slowly. Her expression was all over the place: shock, hurt, fury, and somewhere beneath it all, fear. Real fear. The kind that only shows up when the safety net is finally, truly gone. "Aaron," she started, her voice thin, like she was trying to make herself small. "Please, we need to talk." "I don't think we do. Tyler's school is calling," she said, stepping forward. "They're saying things about payments being canceled, about financial aid being denied. What did you do?" I told them the truth, I said. That I'm not his parent. That I've been paying for him out of guilt and obligation, but that I'm not responsible for your life anymore. She stared at me, stunned. "You can't just walk away." I already did. Her eyes filled with tears. "What about Tyler? You're punishing him for what we did." "No," I said, quiet. "I'm teaching him what accountability looks like." That's when her face changed. The anger flared back. "You think this makes you the good guy? I think it makes me free." She opened her mouth to argue again, but I didn't give her the chance. "Jenna," I said, "go home. And tell Travis." This was step one. Then I closed the door. I didn't hear from Jenna or Travis for 3 full days after that. 3 glorious days of quiet. No buzzing phone. No guilt-laced texts. No fake apologies or frantic pleas pretending to be about Tyler. Just silence. I took long walks. Cooked dinner like I actually had time to taste it. Slept. Deeply. For the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel like I was bracing for someone else's disaster. And then, on day 4, came the voicemail from my mom. "Aaron, I'm coming over tomorrow. We're going to talk about this. I'm not letting you tear this family apart." That's when I knew it was time for step 2. Step 2 wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It didn't involve shouting matches or locked doors. It was just clean. The next morning, before Mom showed up, I gathered every financial record I had. Bank transfers, canceled checks, contracts, even the old emails where Jenna had sent me PayPal requests labeled urgent and please just this once. I put it all in a neat little binder. Then I pulled out another envelope, this one sealed and addressed to my lawyer. Inside was a notarized letter I'd had prepared a year ago when I first started getting the creeping sense that someday I'd need to protect myself. The letter revoked my informal financial responsibility for any member of my extended family and outlined how no further payments were to be made from my accounts on anyone's behalf, just in case things escalated. It also included a formal notification. As of that date, I was resigning from the trust my dad had named me executor of, because, surprise, even after all this, they still planned to make me the one responsible for distributing family assets when the time came. No more. I texted my lawyer to confirm receipt. He wrote back, "Smart move. About time." Then, with everything filed and sent, I waited. Mom arrived at noon. She didn't knock, just walked in like she always had. That was the first thing I noticed, how normal it felt, how routine. She swept in like this was her house, like I was still 16 and she was here to tell me to clean my room or help set the table. But when she saw the binder sitting on the kitchen counter, her face shifted. "What's this?" I gestured. "Everything I've paid for since 2019. Itemized. Receipts included." I thought it might help make the next conversation easier. She flipped through a few pages, frowning. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you said I was tearing the family apart. I figured if we're going to talk about that, we should look at the facts." She closed the binder and gave me one of those tired mom sighs. The kind meant to imply I was being dramatic, overthinking, ungrateful. "You're missing the point," she said. "It's not about money. It's about love. About helping each other." I laughed. "Is that what this is? Love?" "Aaron, because if this is what love looks like, I want no part of it." She sat down across from me, her expression hardening. "You've always been the strong one, the capable one. That's why we leaned on you. You make things look easy. Maybe we forgot to say thank you every time, but that doesn't mean we didn't appreciate it." "That's the problem," I said, calm but sharp. "You didn't forget to say thank you. You just decided you didn't need to anymore." There was a long pause. She didn't deny it. "I'm not going to ruin my life so the rest of you can avoid cleaning up yours," I said. "I love Tyler. But Jenna and Travis? They crossed a line." Mom shook her head slowly. "So what? You're just cutting us all off." I leaned forward. "No, I'm just taking back control of my time, my money, my sanity. If you need something, you ask. I'll think about it. But the era of me being the silent safety net, it's over." She looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she stood, smoothed her sweater, and said, "I hope you can live with this." I smiled. "I'm counting on it." She left without another word. 2 weeks passed. I didn't hear from anyone, not even Tyler. Then, one evening, I got a knock on the door. Not Jenna, not Travis. Tyler, 10 years old, wearing his school backpack, standing nervously on my porch. "Hey," he said. I don't think I was supposed to come." I crouched down to meet him at eye level. "You're always welcome here, buddy. What's up?" He hesitated. "They're fighting a lot. Mom and Dad. About the school. About money. About you." I nodded slowly. "That's not your fault." "I know," he said, but didn't sound convinced. I wanted to say thank you. For the party. And the school. And stuff." I swallowed. "You don't have to thank me, Tyler. I did it because I care about you." He looked down. "They said you don't anymore." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's not true. But sometimes, when adults make bad choices, the people who've been covering for them have to stop. Or else the cycle keeps going forever. Do you understand?" He nodded. Slowly. Then his eyes brightened. "Can I still come hang out sometimes?" "Of course," I said, pulling him into a hug. "Anytime." That night, we made mac and cheese, watched an old movie, played cards until his mom called looking for him. She didn't say much, just told me to send him back home. I did, but not before slipping a small envelope into his backpack. Inside was a prepaid debit card loaded with a modest amount and a sticky note that read, "For books, art supplies, Or whatever you want. Not for your parents. Just for you. I didn't hear a word from Jenna after that. But I didn't need to. Over the next few months, things shifted. I stopped answering family group texts that only showed up when someone needed help. I went back to therapy. Not because I was falling apart, but because I realized I deserved to process how long I'd spent being the stable one and nothing else. I started traveling. Just small trips at first. A cabin near the lake. A flight out to Denver to visit college friends. I left my phone on Do Not Disturb more often than not. At Christmas, I didn't go to the big family dinner. Instead, I took Tyler out for a day in the city, museums, pizza, an arcade. He told me he was thinking about being an architect someday. I told him he'd be great at it. At one point, he looked up at me and said, "You seem happier now." And I realized I was. Not because I'd won some big fight. Not because I'd crushed anyone. But because I finally stopped letting guilt dictate my life. I still get the occasional message from Travis. Mostly passive-aggressive. Stuff like, "Wish we could have worked this out like adults." Or, "Hope you're enjoying your high horse." I don't respond. Jenna stopped pretending completely. I haven't heard from her in months. But that's fine. Let her stew. Let her learn. Let her explain to Tyler, one day, why his uncle had to step back to keep from drowning. Because I wasn't the villain in this story. I was the one who said no. Finally. And sometimes, that's what being the hero really looks like. I'm 33 now, and for the first time in my life, I actually understand what peace feels like. But if you told me 2 years ago that I'd be living in a $5 million house on a quiet street far away from my family, I would have laughed. Back then, I was still trying to earn something I didn't realize I never needed, my parents' approval. My name's Noah, and this is the story of how my family taught me that sometimes walking away is the best kind of revenge. Growing up, my sister Emma and I couldn't have been more different. She was loud, charming, and always knew how to get people to like her. I was the quieter one, the kid who read books at the dinner table and preferred to spend weekends fixing old computers instead of going out. My parents used to say, "Emma's our sunshine," and I used to joke that made me the cloud. It stopped being funny around the time I realized they actually meant it. Emma was the golden child in every sense. When she wanted to take ballet, they bought her custom shoes and paid for private lessons. When I wanted to join a robotics club, they told me it was too expensive for a hobby that won't lead anywhere. She got a car at 17. I got a bus pass. It wasn't jealousy at first, just confusion. I thought maybe if I worked hard enough, they'd notice me too. So I did. I got straight A's, landed a full scholarship to a state university, and even graduated early. The first thing Mom said when I told her was, "Good. That means you can start paying your own bills sooner." I wish I could say I exaggerated, but that tone became the soundtrack of my 20s. Every call home was a reminder that Emma's milestones were celebrations, while mine were obligations. When she got engaged at 26, my parents threw a massive engagement party. I'm talking about catered food, decorations, a photographer, the works. When I told them I'd just been promoted to senior developer at my company, Dad just said, "Well, don't get comfortable. Companies replace people all the time." The wedding talk started a year later. Emma wanted a dream ceremony, outdoor venue, designer dress, over 100 guests. My parents couldn't stop bragging about how proud they were to make it happen. I still remember the afternoon Mom called me and said, almost casually, "We're helping Emma with some of the costs. It's only fair. You know how expensive weddings are these days." I didn't think much of it until I visited home a few weeks later. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, calculator in hand, muttering numbers under his breath. There were receipts everywhere, floral arrangements, deposits, catering. When I glanced over his shoulder, I caught sight of the total. $80,000. I actually froze. "You're giving her 80 grand for her wedding?" I asked. Mom looked up from her tea like it was nothing. "Of course. It's a big day for her. She deserves it." "And what about me?" I said, half joking. Mom's smile faded. "Noah, you don't need help. You're single. You don't even like parties. You've always been fine on your own." That sentence, "you've always been fine on your own," stuck in my head like a splinter. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just sat there, feeling like I'd been quietly written out of my own family's story. Over the next few months, I tried to shake it off. I told myself it didn't matter, that money wasn't love, and that Emma could have her fairy tale day. But when I saw the wedding photos later, the resentment hit me like a freight train. There was my entire family smiling in expensive suits, The venue decorated with white roses and chandeliers, my parents beaming like they'd just married off royalty. I wasn't invited to the rehearsal dinner, and my name wasn't even mentioned in the speeches. One of Emma's friends later told me my parents said I couldn't make it because I was too busy with work. I wasn't. I was home, staring at my ceiling, realizing they hadn't even bothered to ask. For the first time, I stopped calling. I skipped Christmas that year, sent a simple "hope everyone's well" text, and focused on work. I poured every ounce of frustration into my projects. Long nights, quiet mornings, endless caffeine. I climbed faster than anyone expected. When the company was acquired by a major tech firm, I got a payout I still struggle to wrap my head around. It wasn't generational wealth, but it was enough to change my life overnight. Around that time, I met Maya, a real estate agent with the kind of sharp humor that made you forget your own bitterness. We clicked instantly. For the first time, someone actually believed in me without conditions. We bought a modest home together at first, and when I told her about my family, she said something I'll never forget. "You keep trying to buy their love, Noah. Maybe it's time you invest in yourself instead." That hit hard. So I did. I started a software consultancy with a small team of people I trusted. Within a year, it exploded. Clients from all over the world, contracts worth more than I'd ever imagined. The kind of success my parents never believed I'd achieve, not that they were around to see it. I'd kept my distance. No visits, no calls, just polite messages here and there when birthdays came up. Then, one afternoon, 2 years after Emma's wedding, I got a text from an unknown number. "Hey, Noah, it's Mom. Please call me when you can. It's important." I stared at the screen for a while, debating whether to respond. Something about the wording felt off, that forced politeness she used when she needed something. Against my better judgment, I called. Her voice came through tight and shaky. "Noah, did you buy a new house?" I blinked. Yeah? How'd you know?" There was a pause, then a muffled sound, like she was covering the phone, followed by a trembling sigh. "Your sister drove by it. She said it's big, Noah. Really big." "Is it true?" "Mom, what are you talking about?" "She said it's worth $5 million. Her voice cracked on the word million. She called me crying, "Noah." She kept asking, "Why does he have that? How is that fair?" I didn't say anything for a few seconds. I could almost picture it. Emma's car slowing down in front of my gate, her hand flying to her mouth, realizing the brother she once pitied now lived better than anyone in the family. Mom's tone changed, soft but heavy with accusation. "You know, it's not nice to flaunt your money like that. Your sister's been struggling since the baby came. Maybe you could help her out a little? She's your only sister, after all." There it was. The familiar script, word for word. The same pattern I'd heard my entire life. Emma gets the sympathy, and I get the guilt trip. "Mom," I said slowly, "you told me I didn't deserve help. Remember?" Her silence on the other end was deafening. The thing about family betrayal is that it doesn't always come with shouting or drama. Sometimes it's quiet, a lifetime of small dismissals that pile up until they form a wall. And that day, standing by my window, watching the sun dip over the trees in my backyard, I realized I was finally on the other side of it. But I didn't hang up yet. Because deep down, I wanted to hear what she'd say next, the part where the entitlement turned into demand, where the mask slipped just enough to reveal what my family really thought of me now. That's when she said it, the sentence that changed everything. And that's exactly where everything began to unravel. Mom's voice cracked like she'd been rehearsing it in front of the mirror. "Noah, your sister's going through a tough time. Her husband lost his job a few months ago, and they've been barely keeping up with their mortgage. She's scared they'll lose the house. I told her you might be able to." "Stop." I didn't raise my voice, but it was enough to make her pause. "You told her what exactly?" "That you might be able to help," she said quickly, as if saying it fast would make it sound harmless. "You're doing so well, and she's your family. It's what family does. You have to understand how hard it's been for them, especially after the baby." So she drives past my home, calls you crying about how unfair it is, and your solution is for me to bail her out. She's emotional, Noah. Don't twist my words. That was the thing about my mother. She always managed to make me feel like I was the unreasonable one. Every time I tried to set a boundary, she found a way to turn it into guilt. Even through the phone, I could almost see her expression, that practiced frown she used when she wanted to sound disappointed instead of manipulative. "You've always been so distant," she continued. We barely hear from you anymore. You don't visit. You don't come home for holidays. And now you're living in that mansion all alone. What's the point of success if you can't share it with your family? That line, what's the point of success, hit me differently. Because she wasn't asking about happiness. She was talking about access. I could hear Emma in the background now. Her voice was muffled but loud enough to make out bits and pieces. Tell him. Just tell him to stop acting like he's better than everyone. We're drowning, and he's sitting there in his fancy house doing nothing. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. For the next few weeks, I tried to brush it off. But that phone call dug under my skin like a splinter. Every few days, I'd get another message, sometimes from Mom, sometimes from Dad, occasionally even from Emma. The tone was always the same. Polite at first, then guilt-laced, then outright passive-aggressive. Dad's first message said, "Your sister's under a lot of pressure, son. Be the bigger person." Mom's next one said, "You've changed, Noah. Money's made you cold." And Emma's? "I can't believe you'd watch your family struggle like this. After everything our parents did for you. After everything they did for me." The irony nearly made me laugh. See, I never resented the money itself. Not really. I resented the message behind it. That my worth had always been conditional. That love came with a receipt and an asterisk. I'd built my life on proving I could stand on my own, but somehow, that made me the villain. It didn't stop there. A month later, I got an invitation in the mail. Thick ivory cardstock, gold embossed edges, fancy cursive script, baby Noah's first birthday. Yeah, she named her son after me. At first, I thought it was some kind of peace offering, maybe her way of extending an olive branch. I almost convinced myself to go, but when I called to ask about it, Mom answered instead of Emma. "Oh, you got the invite," she said cheerfully, too cheerfully. Emma's so excited. "It's going to be a big day. The whole family will be there." "Yeah, I saw. I was just wondering, is there a gift registry or something?" There was a pause. "Oh, we don't want you to buy anything," she said, lowering her voice like she was saying something sensitive. Emma actually thought maybe instead of a gift, you could contribute to something more meaningful. I knew where this was going before she said it. She and Jacob are still trying to catch up on bills. And you know, the baby needs a stable home. It would mean so much if you could help them out a little. You don't have to make a big show of it. Just quietly help. Quietly help. As if the secrecy made it noble instead of manipulative. I didn't even bother asking how much. I just told her I wouldn't be attending. That's when she snapped. "You're being cruel, Noah. Do you know how embarrassing this is for me? For your father? Everyone knows you're doing well, and now you can't even show your face because you're too proud to help your own sister?" "I'm not proud," I said flatly. "I'm done." And I meant it. But the thing about boundaries is that people who've benefited from crossing them don't respect them easily. 2 days before the party, Dad called me. The voice of reason, or at least he liked to think so. "Son, I'm not taking sides here," he began, which was his way of saying he absolutely was. "But your sister's going through a rough patch. She's made mistakes, sure, but who hasn't? We all have to look out for each other." "I did that for 30 years, I said. "All it got me was ignored." He sighed. "You know, when we helped Emma, we didn't do it to hurt you. We did it because she needed it more. You were always the independent one. We figured you didn't want our help." "Yeah," I said quietly. And that assumption became pretty convenient for everyone, didn't it? He didn't have an answer for that. The day of the birthday party came and went. I spent it hiking with Maya. No phone, no family, no guilt. But when I got home that evening, I had 17 missed calls. 5 from Mom, 6 from Dad, and the rest from numbers I didn't recognize. There were texts too, pictures from the party, comments like, "Wish you were here, Uncle Noah," and one from Emma that said, "You made things awkward. Everyone asked why you didn't show up. Thanks for ruining my son's birthday." I didn't respond, but I could feel the anger simmering just below the surface. Not hot enough to explode, just enough to burn slow. Weeks passed. The messages stopped. Silence, finally. I started to think maybe it was over. Then, in early spring, my phone buzzed while I was in a meeting. It was a voicemail from Mom. I almost ignored it, but something in her tone, the way she said my name, made me listen. "Noah, honey, I need you to call me back. Please. It's about Emma. She's been so upset lately, and, well, she might do something drastic if this keeps going. She feels like you hate her. Can't you just talk to her? Maybe invite her over. Let her see you're not angry? Please." For me, that last part, for me, was a knife disguised as kindness. Maya saw my face after I listened to it. What happened? She asked softly. They're trying to use guilt as currency again, I said. And they think I'll fall for it. Will you? I shook my head. Not this time. But even as I said it, something in me felt uneasy. Because I knew my mother. If emotional manipulation didn't work, she'd escalate. And she did. A week later, she showed up at my gate. Unannounced. Standing there in a floral dress like it was Sunday brunch. When I stepped outside, she smiled as if nothing had happened. I just wanted to see you, she said, peering past me toward the house. It's beautiful, Noah. You've really done well for yourself. Thanks, I said cautiously. She nodded, taking it all in, the wide driveway, the manicured hedges, the quiet hum of success. Then her expression shifted. You know, she said softly, Emma drove by here the other day. She was crying for hours. She kept saying she didn't understand how things ended up this way. How her brother got everything, and she got left behind. I didn't say anything. Mom took a deep breath. You don't have to give her money. Just talk to her. Let her see inside. She feels like you're punishing her by shutting her out. I couldn't help it. I laughed. She's the one who called me arrogant, who told people I only made money because I got lucky in tech. She made her bed, Mom. That's not fair, she said, her voice rising. You think you're so above us now. We raised you. We made sacrifices for you. That last line, we raised you, was the final straw. No, I said, stepping closer. You raised Emma. You tolerated me. She blinked, her face tightening with something between shock and offense. You don't mean that. I mean every word. She left soon after, but not before saying, You'll regret this one day, Noah. Family is all you have. I watched her car disappear down the street, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No guilt. No sadness. Just quiet. But that quiet wouldn't last. Because a week later, I got an email. Not from Mom. Not from Dad. From Emma's husband, Jacob. Subject line, You owe us an explanation. And what was inside that email, the screenshots, the accusations, the audacity, would set everything in motion. That's where the real war began. The email came in on a Tuesday morning, 8:47 a.m., to be exact. I was halfway through my coffee when I saw the subject line, You owe us an explanation. At first, I thought it was spam. The phrasing was so blunt, so entitled, that it didn't even cross my mind that it could be from Jacob, my brother-in-law, the same guy who once asked me how to turn off the Wi-Fi because the internet's acting slow. But then I noticed the name. Jacob P. His address. Her husband. The message started off polite, almost formal. Noah, it began. I've been trying to reach you for weeks, but since you've been ignoring everyone, I thought an email might get your attention. I don't want to start a fight, but this situation has gone too far. I frowned and scrolled down. Emma has been crying every night. She feels betrayed and humiliated. Your parents are heartbroken. You act like we've done something unforgivable, but all we ever did was love you. Now you're out here buying mansions and living large while your family struggles. You could help us, but you choose not to. That's cruel, Noah. There was more. Paragraph after paragraph of guilt-laced nonsense. But one line near the bottom made my stomach twist. If you don't want to help willingly, then at least don't make things worse by lying to people about us. Emma told me what you said. I stared at that line for a long time. Lying to people. I hadn't talked about my family to anyone except Maya, and even then, I never exaggerated. So what exactly had Emma told him? Then I reached the last paragraph. Also, we've seen what you're doing online. It's disgusting how you pretend to be generous and humble on social media when in reality, you've abandoned your own blood. You made us look like fools. Consider this your last chance to make things right before we take it further. I sat back, heart pounding. Take it further? What did that even mean? Maya walked into the office just as I finished reading. You okay? She asked, noticing the look on my face. I handed her my phone. She read silently for a minute, then said, This isn't just guilt tripping anymore. This is a threat. Yeah, I muttered. And I have a bad feeling about what further means. I didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 days later, I woke up to a barrage of notifications, emails, texts, even a few missed calls from colleagues. Something had gone wrong. My stomach dropped as I opened one of the messages from a client. Hey Noah, saw some weird stuff on Facebook this morning. Is everything okay? Facebook? I barely used it. I hadn't posted anything in years. My hands were shaking as I opened the app. The first thing I saw was a post from Emma. It was a long, emotional rant, paragraphs of half-truths twisted into something ugly. I never thought I'd say this publicly, but I'm at my breaking point. My brother, Noah, who grew up with every privilege, has turned his back on his family. While we struggle to pay our bills, he flaunts his wealth and refuses to help, not even for his baby nephew. Money has changed him. He's forgotten who helped him get there. I'm not asking for pity. I just want people to know what kind of person he's become. Attached were 3 photos. One of my house from the outside, one of my car in the driveway, and this one made my blood run cold. A screenshot of an old text I'd sent her years ago when I was still working at my first job. It said, "Someday I'll make enough that I won't have to ask for anything from anyone ever again." Out of context, it looked arrogant. The post had over 100 likes and dozens of comments. Some sympathetic, some outright nasty. Wow, money really changes people. Can't believe family would do this. Hope karma gets him. I just sat there, staring at the screen, my throat tight. Maya placed a hand on my shoulder. "Noah, we can report it. You don't have to respond." But that wasn't the worst of it. Because by that afternoon, I found out she hadn't stopped there. Emma had sent an email to my company, to my partners, to clients. Using her personal account, she'd written that I was under investigation for financial misconduct and that people should be careful doing business with me. She even included fake screenshots of supposed transactions from my consulting firm's account, numbers she'd clearly made up, but convincing enough at first glance to cause damage. One of my junior partners called me, panicked. "Noah, what is this? Did something happen? We're getting calls from clients asking if we're being sued." I spent the next 48 hours putting out fires, calling lawyers, drafting statements, explaining that none of it was true. Thankfully, I had records, clean audits, statements, proof of every transaction. But that didn't matter. The damage to my reputation had already begun. It felt personal in a way I'd never experienced before. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about humiliation. And when I thought it couldn't get worse, Mom called. She didn't even sound angry, just exhausted. "Noah, I told you this would happen if you kept ignoring your sister." "You told me." I snapped. "She publicly accused me of financial crimes, Mom. She's trying to destroy my business." "She's hurting," Mom said softly. "You pushed her too far." I laughed bitterly. "So this is my fault now?" Her silence said everything. Something in me cracked then. All those years of being the quiet one, the peacemaker, the one who swallowed his pride just to keep the peace, it all boiled over. "You know what, Mom? I used to think you didn't understand what you were doing. But now I see it. You taught her this. You taught her that she can do anything, say anything, and you'll always defend her. Congratulations. You raised a manipulator." She gasped like I'd hit her. "Don't you dare talk about my daughter like that." "Your daughter?" I said quietly. "I stopped being your son a long time ago." I hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every memory replayed in my mind. Every time I'd been dismissed, mocked, or made to feel small. And now, when I'd finally built something of my own, they were trying to tear it down. But it wasn't just emotional anymore. The next morning, I got an alert from my accountant. Someone had tried to access my company's financial accounts using a password reset request. Twice. The IP address traced back to a small town, the same one where my parents and Emma lived. I sat there staring at the email for a long time, feeling something shift inside me. The kind of cold, deliberate anger that doesn't explode, it calculates. When Maya came downstairs, I was already at my laptop, typing. "I'm done playing nice," I said. She didn't stop me. She just nodded. "Then do it right. No shouting, no emotion, just facts." And that's exactly what I did. I started gathering evidence. Screenshots of every message, every fake claim, every financial attempt. I documented the company's statements, traced IP logs, contacted my lawyer, and even reached out to a cybersecurity investigator. The results? Let's just say Emma and Jacob had been very careless. They'd been using their home Wi-Fi for everything, including the fake emails. Every message they sent pretending to be anonymous led straight back to their address. Still, I didn't act immediately. I wanted to make sure that when I struck, it would be irreversible. And then the final straw came. I was on a video call with one of our international clients when he said, almost hesitantly, "Noah, I hate to bring this up, but one of your relatives contacted our company directly. Said you've been lying about your credentials." My stomach dropped. "Who?" He hesitated. "She called herself Emma." Claimed to be your sister. That was it. She had crossed from petty family drama into full-blown sabotage. I ended the call, closed my laptop, and just sat there for a while, letting the silence settle around me. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm, the world peaceful, completely unaware of the storm building inside me. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. She wants to ruin my life? I said. Fine. Let's see how she likes it when the truth comes out. Maya didn't even ask what I meant. She just said, then it's time. Because by then, I already knew how to end it. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with proof. Real, undeniable proof that would turn the entire family against her and expose exactly what kind of person she'd become. I just needed one last thing before I pulled the trigger. And that came a few days later, in the form of an unexpected letter that landed in my mailbox. The return address? My parents' house. The sender? My father. Inside was something that made my hands go cold, something I hadn't expected to see in 1,000 years. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just about Emma anymore. This was about all of them. The envelope was thick, heavier than normal mail. My father's handwriting was neat, deliberate, the kind he used when he wanted to appear calm, even when he wasn't. I sat at the kitchen island, the morning sun filtering through the blinds, just staring at it for a moment before opening it. Something about that letter felt final. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice, and a printed document underneath. The first page was written in my father's voice, measured, diplomatic, and dripping with the kind of false civility that always made me uneasy. Noah, your mother and I have talked a lot about everything that's happened. We're worried about how things are spiraling. We can't keep pretending this is just a misunderstanding between siblings. You've cut off communication, isolated yourself, and now you've hired lawyers to threaten your own family. That's not how we raised you. We've decided it's best to formally separate ourselves from any of your business dealings or financial matters. Enclosed is a statement we'll be filing with the county clerk to legally remove our names from any shared property rights or trusts. We hope someday you'll come to your senses and realize family means more than money. Dad, for a moment, I didn't understand. Shared property rights? Trusts? I didn't share anything with them, not legally. Then I looked at the second document and felt my chest tighten. It was a formal statement of withdrawal from a family trust, one I didn't even know existed. I read it 3 times, trying to process what it meant. My father had listed my name alongside my sister's, theirs, and something called the Patterson Family Fund, apparently established 20 years ago. My name appeared as a beneficiary, but I had never seen or heard of it in my life. When Maya came into the kitchen, I must have looked pale because she immediately said, "What happened?" I handed her the papers. She read them slowly, her brow furrowing. "Wait, you didn't know about this?" I shook my head. Never even heard of it. We did some digging. Turns out, when my grandparents passed, they left behind a small inheritance. Nothing massive, but enough to set up a family trust. My parents were the executors. Emma and I were the named beneficiaries. But over the years, they'd quietly restructured it, putting Emma in control of the assets and redirecting funds toward her expenses, wedding costs, mortgage help, emergency support. Essentially, my parents had been dipping into what was partially mine to bankroll my sister's lifestyle, and the letter wasn't them separating from me. It was them covering their tracks. I sat there in silence for a long time, not even angry, just hollow, because it hit me. They'd been using my name all along, probably to make the trust look legitimate for tax reasons. They'd benefited from it, and now, when things got messy, they were erasing me like I never existed. That was the moment everything broke. That night, I barely slept. I walked the house in silence, that letter replaying in my head like a bad song. Every word, every sentence felt like a confirmation of something I'd always suspected but never wanted to admit, that my family had never seen me as part of them, only as a tool. The next morning, I drove aimlessly. I didn't even know where I was going until I ended up parked outside an overlook by the coast, the kind of place I used to go when I needed to think. The waves were violent that day, crashing hard against the rocks below, the sky overcast and gray. I sat there for hours, just letting the world move without me. At one point, my phone buzzed. Another message from Mom. "Please don't make this worse, Noah. You've done enough damage already." No apology. No acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just blame. That's when I realized something quietly, painfully, simple. They were never going to understand. I could present proof, logic, evidence, and they'd still twist it until I was the villain. So I decided to stop explaining. For the next few weeks, I shut down. No calls, no emails, no business meetings. My partners handled most of the work while I drifted in a fog of exhaustion. Maya tried to help. She'd sit beside me in the evenings, silent, just holding my hand. But even she couldn't reach me fully. I felt like a ghost in my own life. Then one night, as I was sitting on the back patio, watching the lights of the city below, she came out with 2 cups of coffee and said quietly, "You can't let them keep this power over you." I didn't answer. "You keep thinking closure means they'll admit they were wrong," she said. "They won't. Some people would rather rewrite the story than face it." Her words hung in the air. She was right. I'd been waiting for something that would never come, for them to see me, to say, "We were wrong. You mattered, too." But all I'd gotten was a letter cutting me out of my own bloodline. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight them anymore. I was going to walk away, completely. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told him to move forward with a full review of the trust. Not to contest it, not to reclaim it, just to have a record. Proof. Something that couldn't be erased or twisted later. Then I called my accountant and started the process of moving every financial tie out of reach. New accounts, new security layers, even a new LLC structure under a different name. By the end of that week, there wasn't a single connection between me and my family that could be exploited. And yet, even as I cut those ties, the sadness lingered. I'd lost something deeper than money. I'd lost the illusion of family. I remember one evening in particular, early summer, the house quiet, the air heavy with the smell of rain. I found myself scrolling through old photos. Emma and me as kids, building pillow forts in the living room. Mom smiling at us from behind the camera. Dad grilling in the background. It almost looked real, that image of a happy family. But memories are tricky. The mind edits them kindly. I shut the laptop and whispered, "That version's gone." After that, something changed in me. I started working again, not with obsession, but with purpose. I built, quietly, methodically. I didn't talk about revenge. I didn't rant or lash out. I just focused. Maya once asked me what I was planning, and I told her the truth. Nothing dramatic. Just peace. But if the truth ever comes out, and it will, I want to be ready. Months passed. The calls slowed, then stopped. The Facebook posts were deleted, probably because the lawyer's letter had finally reached them. I started to feel human again. I traveled. I invested. I stayed off social media entirely. But peace is a fragile thing. One afternoon, about 6 months later, I got an email from an old family friend, Mrs. Carson, a neighbor from our childhood street. She'd always liked me, treated me like the son she never had. Her message was simple. "Noah, dear, I hope you're well. I thought you should know, your parents are selling their house. Emma and Jacob are moving in with them for now. They mentioned something about starting over after some financial trouble. It sounds serious. Selling their house. Starting over." I closed the laptop and sat there in silence. That's when it dawned on me. The trust money was gone. Every dollar. They drained it to prop up Emma's lifestyle until it collapsed under its own weight. And now, for the first time, they were facing consequences. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part, the smaller, more tired part, felt sorry for them. But pity has a short half-life. Because a week later, I found out something that changed everything again. I was out running errands when I stopped by the bank to handle some paperwork for my new company account. The banker, a friendly guy who'd helped me for years, pulled me aside. "Hey Noah," he said. "Just a heads up, your old joint account with your parents was recently accessed. There was an attempt to withdraw funds, but it was frozen automatically since it was marked inactive." I blinked. "Wait, what joint account?" He turned his screen around and showed me. Sure enough, there it was, an account created when I was 17. My dad must have opened it back then for college savings or something similar. They'd left my name on it for formality, and I'd forgotten it even existed. But it wasn't empty. There were a few $1,000s in there, probably remnants of something they'd never closed properly. "Good thing we caught it," the banker said. "Otherwise, that money would have been gone." I thanked him, left the bank, and sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. It was such a small thing, a forgotten account, a frozen withdrawal, but to me, it said everything. Even after everything they'd done, even after cutting me out, they were still trying to take what little was left with my name on it. And that's when I realized something quietly, almost peacefully. I was done feeling sorry for them. Because people like that don't learn through kindness or guilt. They only understand consequence. So I started to plan, not out of rage, but out of precision. Not for money. Not for revenge in the petty sense. For truth. Because if my family was going to destroy my name, I was going to make sure the world knew exactly who they were first. And soon enough, I'd have the perfect opportunity to do it. One that would come knocking all on its own. I just didn't know yet that when it did, it would drag every secret they'd ever buried into the light. The turning point didn't come with fireworks or some cinematic moment of triumph. It came quietly, on a gray Tuesday morning when the fog hung low and I was sipping coffee in the same kitchen where I once opened my father's letter. For the first time in months, I felt still. The kind of stillness that comes after a long storm, when the thunder finally gives up and all that's left is the hum of the world returning to normal. I had spent months detangling my life from my family's chaos. It was like pulling weeds from a garden. You think you've gotten them all, and then another root appears. But with every severed tie, I felt lighter. My lawyer finalized the paperwork confirming that I was no longer associated with the Patterson family fund. My accountant had secured my assets and trusts that only I controlled. Every legal and financial vulnerability was locked away tight. But that wasn't what made life start to bloom again. It was the sense of space. Emotional space. The first few weeks after cutting ties felt strange, like stepping out of a noisy room and realizing how loud the silence is. I didn't know who I was without the background noise of guilt and obligation. For most of my life, I'd been reacting, trying to prove something to people who didn't care. Now, for the first time, I was building for myself. Maya noticed the shift before I did. One morning, she looked up from her laptop and said, "You're different lately." Different how? You're not checking your phone every 5 minutes waiting for another message from them. I smiled faintly. Guess I ran out of reasons to. She closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. So what now? The truth was, I didn't know. But I had ideas. Ambitions I'd buried under years of trying to stay small. For months, I'd been approached by investors who wanted to expand my consultancy into something bigger, a global platform for independent developers. I'd always said no, mostly because the thought of managing that scale terrified me. But now, fear felt smaller than regret. So I said yes. The next year became a blur of motion. I flew from city to city, built partnerships, hired new teams, and learned how to lead in ways I'd never been taught. I was careful with everything. No shortcuts, no inflated promises, no fake it till you make it. I had seen what deceit looked like up close. I wanted no part of it. There were setbacks, of course, bad hires, long nights, burnout. But the difference was that this time, I wasn't doing it to prove something to anyone. I was doing it because I believed in it. And that belief, it turned out, was contagious. Within 18 months, our company had grown from a small consultancy into a full-fledged software firm with global contracts. Tech magazines started calling, and interviews followed. I avoided talking about my past, kept my answers focused on perseverance, discipline, teamwork. But the people who'd known me for years could sense it. This wasn't just business growth. It was personal evolution. The first time I saw my name in a Forbes article, Maya printed it out and taped it to the fridge like a proud parent. "For the archives," she said with a grin. I laughed. "You act like I won a Nobel Prize." "You kind of did," she teased. Just the tech version. Life began to feel full again. Trips abroad, new friends, long dinners that didn't end in arguments. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying a version of myself that needed defending. And yet, in the quiet moments, when I'd come home late and see the city lights shimmering outside the window, there was still that faint ache. The ache of knowing my family had no idea who I'd become. Or worse, that they did know and couldn't stand it. I tried not to dwell on it. But the universe has a way of testing how well you've really moved on. It started with a voicemail, another unknown number. I almost ignored it until curiosity got the better of me. The voice was formal, unfamiliar. "Hello, Mr. Patterson. This is Richard Caldwell, estate attorney representing the late Mr. and Mrs. Evans. I believe you were listed as a contact for their community outreach fund. Please return my call when you can." The Evanses were a retired couple who had lived 2 streets over from my childhood home. They were kind people, always inviting neighborhood kids to their porch for lemonade, always treating me kindly even when my parents didn't. I hadn't spoken to them in years. When I called the attorney back, he explained that the Evanses had passed away a few months prior and had left behind an endowment, a scholarship fund for underprivileged students interested in computer science. Your name came up, he said, because they mentioned how you used to fix their computer for free when you were a teenager. They were very fond of you. I was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? They'd like you to oversee the fund. It's not large, but they trusted you to manage it honestly. I said yes. Something about that request, simple, generous, human, reminded me of who I used to be before all the noise. So I took the project seriously. I built an online platform for the scholarship, automated the application system, and personally reviewed the first batch of applicants. Within months, the program had funded its first 5 students. One of them wrote me a letter that said, "Thank you for believing in people you don't even know." That one sentence hit harder than any award ever could. From there, things accelerated. The scholarship gained traction, local media picked it up, and soon we were collaborating with universities. It became a movement, a small one at first, but growing fast. People started to associate my name not just with business, but with opportunity. That's when the invitations started rolling in. Tech conferences, leadership panels, charity galas. I accepted a few, mostly out of curiosity. One evening, at a business event in San Francisco, a journalist asked during a Q&A, "What motivates you now that you've achieved success?" I thought for a moment before answering. Freedom. The kind that comes from knowing no one owns a piece of you anymore. It wasn't rehearsed. It just came out naturally. But judging by the reaction, it resonated. That quote ended up circulating online. People reposted it, reworded it, shared it. It became one of those motivational lines you see on LinkedIn with someone's headshot in grayscale behind it. And while I didn't care much about internet fame, it served one unintended purpose. It reached them. I didn't know until months later. I was in New York, wrapping up a meeting, when Maya called. "You're not going to believe this," she said, half amused, half wary. "Your mom tried to reach out again." I froze. "What?" She sent a handwritten letter to the office, addressed to Mr. Noah Patterson, founder and CEO. Guess she saw the articles. I let out a slow breath. "What did it say?" Maya hesitated. "I haven't opened it. It's on your desk." When I got back, the envelope was sitting neatly beside my computer. Cream paper, elegant cursive. My mother's handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it, remembering the last time she'd written me, the last time her words had cut me open. Eventually, I unfolded it. "Noah, we saw you on the news. Your father and I are proud of what you've accomplished, even if we don't always understand your choices. I know we've had our differences, but maybe it's time to put the past behind us. We're not getting any younger, and Emma could really use her brother right now. Things haven't been easy for her. Maybe we could have dinner sometime and talk things through. Family should stick together." There it was again, the same pattern, wrapped in politeness, baited with guilt. I folded the letter back up and placed it in a drawer. Not out of anger, out of clarity. They hadn't changed. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted proximity to success. That realization didn't hurt this time. It just confirmed what I already knew. A week later, the company hosted a conference in Los Angeles. Over 200 people attended, developers, investors, students, journalists. I gave a keynote speech about resilience and reinvention. Halfway through, I looked out at the crowd and spotted a young man near the back, taking furious notes. He reminded me of myself at 20, nervous, eager, underestimated. After the talk, he came up to me. "I just wanted to say, I read that article about you. My family doesn't really support what I'm doing either. Hearing your story, it helped." That was the moment I realized something important. I didn't need my old family anymore. I'd built a new one made of people who believed in me, who grew with me, who didn't measure my worth by how much I gave them. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Still, the story wasn't over. Because not long after that conference, just as everything was falling into place, I got another call. This time, from an unknown number with a familiar area code. I answered, expecting maybe a journalist or a client. Instead, a quiet voice said, "Noah? It's Jacob." I froze. He sounded different. Defeated. "I know you don't want to hear from me," he said, "but you need to know what's happening. It's about Emma and your parents." His next words made my heart sink, because as much as I had moved on, I wasn't ready for what he was about to tell me. And that single phone call, would change everything all over again. Jacob's voice wavered on the line, the sound of someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. They're in trouble, Noah. Real trouble. I leaned back in my chair, my tone calm but wary. Define trouble. He hesitated. The trust, it's gone. Completely gone. Your dad's been borrowing against it for years, and the last investment he made tanked. Some real estate scheme. They owe close to $500,000 now. The house sale barely covered the mortgage. I didn't respond right away. I'd suspected the trust was dry, but hearing it confirmed was different. There was a hollow satisfaction in it, like watching a fire finally burn itself out. Jacob continued, his voice lower now. They thought they could fix it by refinancing through a contact. Someone they met through Emma's old business friend. But apparently, the deal was fraudulent. They lost everything. They might face charges if they can't repay. I closed my eyes. And you're telling me this because? He exhaled shakily. Because they're desperate. And your mom, she's saying things. About you. That you owe them. That you're the reason they're in this mess because you turned your back on family. She's talking about going public again, Noah. But this time, not just online. She's talking to reporters. That got my attention. Reporters? I repeated slowly. Yeah, some local outlet that runs those human interest stories. She wants to set the record straight. Make it look like you built your fortune by exploiting your family's trust. I told her it was insane, but she won't listen. She keeps saying she has proof, bank statements, emails, old documents. She's convinced she can make it look like you stole from them. For a few seconds, all I could hear was my own breathing. It wasn't anger that hit me. It was clarity. Cold, precise clarity. Jacob, I said quietly, thank you for telling me. He sighed. I'm not doing this for her. I'm doing it because Emma's scared. I think she finally realizes how far it's gone. But your parents, especially your mom, she won't stop until she destroys you. Then maybe it's time I stopped letting her try. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, my mind methodically piecing together everything I'd gathered over the past 2 years. Emails, screenshots, messages, financial records. I had enough evidence to prove my innocence 10 times over, but that wasn't enough anymore. This wasn't about defending myself. It was about ending the narrative permanently. Maya came into my office a few minutes later, coffee in hand. She didn't have to ask. She could read everything in my expression. What did they do now? They're trying to frame me, I said simply. Her eyebrows lifted, but she didn't look surprised. Then it's time to tell the truth. I nodded. All of it. Over the next week, I put everything in motion. I reached out to my company's PR team, not to bury the story, but to prepare for it. If my family wanted to make this public, I'd meet them there. Except this time, I'd control the story. But I didn't stop there. I called my lawyer and authorized a full audit of the Patterson family fund. We already had documentation, but I wanted an official, certified report. I wanted every transaction traced, every cent that had been diverted, every loan taken, every expense labeled under Emma's support. If they wanted to drag me into the spotlight, I was going to bring the receipts. 2 weeks later, the audit was complete. The findings were brutal. My name had been used dozens of times to authorize disbursements I never knew about. My parents had falsified digital consent forms, using my outdated e-signature template from when I worked for them years ago. They'd effectively stolen from me under my own name. And now, facing financial ruin, they were about to publicly accuse me of doing it. So I waited. 3 days later, it happened. An article appeared in the Midland Tribune titled, "Tech CEO's Family Claims Betrayal. He Built His Empire with Our Money." The story was full of emotional quotes from my mother and father. Emma wasn't quoted, probably too ashamed or too scared to add her name. The article painted them as sympathetic, struggling parents left behind by a greedy son. What they didn't know was that I'd been expecting it. By that evening, my statement was ready. Calm, measured, professional. My PR team released it across all channels with supporting documents. Not opinion, just facts. All financial activities tied to the Patterson family trust were conducted without my consent. I have cooperated fully with authorities and have submitted verified audits proving misuse of my name and assets by other parties. I hope those involved get the help they need. I will not be commenting further. But there was one more thing. Alongside that statement, I uploaded a series of public documents to a shared legal repository, open to journalists, investigators, and the public. Redacted for privacy, but comprehensive. The audit. The falsified e-signatures. The transaction logs. Every piece of evidence showing exactly how the money had been drained. And within hours, the narrative flipped. The same outlet that published the smear story ran an update. New evidence contradicts Patterson family's claims. Audit suggests fraudulent use of CEO's identity. By the next morning, the news had spread beyond the local papers. National outlets picked it up. Financial blogs, tech sites, even a few business ethics podcasts. The story wasn't about me being a villain anymore. It was about a family scandal, a betrayal that cut the other way. I didn't gloat. I didn't post a victory tweet or make any statements. I let the truth do the talking. But the real moment of poetic justice came a few days later when my lawyer forwarded me a message from the county prosecutor's office. They were launching an investigation into the misuse of trust funds and identity fraud. The potential defendants, my parents. It wasn't revenge I felt then, it was release. Still, I didn't want them destroyed. I didn't want prison or public humiliation. What I wanted was for the world to finally see the truth and for them to face it. So I made one final move. Through a mutual contact at the Tribune, I arranged an interview, not about my family, but about resilience. We talked about integrity, about choosing peace over retaliation, about what happens when you finally stop chasing approval. The interviewer asked if my upbringing had influenced who I'd become. I smiled and said, in every possible way. Sometimes the best lessons come from the worst teachers. It was subtle, but everyone who needed to understand it did. After that, the noise died down. My parents' accusations fizzled under legal scrutiny. Their assets were seized temporarily pending investigation. Emma moved out of their home, filing for separation from Jacob a few months later. I didn't interfere. I didn't reach out. I'd done enough. But one evening, as the sun set behind the hills, I found myself standing in the same spot on my patio where I'd once read my father's letter. I thought about everything. The years of silence, the betrayal, the slow unraveling of a family that had mistaken control for love. And I realized something. I hadn't just survived them. I'd outgrown them. The next morning, I made one last call to my lawyer. Can we make sure the trust investigation stays public record? I asked. He hesitated. You sure? Most people want to keep that private. I want transparency, I said. Let it stand as a record. For anyone who ever tries to twist the story again. He paused, then said quietly, understood. That was it. My quiet revenge. No shouting, no revenge plot worthy of a movie. Just truth, laid bare for the world to see. And yet, deep down, I knew the fallout hadn't even begun. Because people like my parents didn't just crumble overnight. They fought back, even when there was nothing left to fight for. And when the final confrontation came, it wouldn't be through lawyers or news stories. It would be face-to-face. And I had a feeling it was coming soon. It happened 6 months later, on an ordinary morning that didn't feel like the end of anything. The air was cool, the sky half-clouded, and I was walking through the atrium of my office building when the front desk called up to tell me someone was waiting in the lobby. When I came down, it was them. My parents. They looked smaller somehow, like time had compressed them. My father's once proud shoulders were slumped, his hair thin and gray. My mother clutched her purse like a shield, her eyes darting around the lobby, terrified someone might recognize her. They both stood when I approached, as if instinctively still trying to perform dignity even now. Noah, my mother said first. Her voice was low, shaky, like a violin that had lost its tune. We just wanted to talk. I didn't say anything. I just gestured toward a private meeting room. Inside, the silence felt heavy, like we were sitting inside the echo of everything that had happened. My father cleared his throat. You've made your point. I raised an eyebrow. My point. You embarrassed us, he said, his tone brittle. Dragged our name through the mud. We can't go anywhere without people whispering. Do you have any idea what that's like? I let out a small, disbelieving laugh. You accused me of theft and fraud in the press. You forged my name on financial documents. And you're worried about whispers? My mother flinched. We were desperate, she said softly. We didn't know what else to do. You wouldn't talk to us, and Emma's an adult. I interrupted. She made her choices. Dad leaned forward, his voice rising. We did what we thought was best for this family. I met his eyes evenly. No, you did what was best for Emma. Always. That shut him up. For a long time, no one said a word. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound. Finally, my mother spoke again, tears brimming. We lost everything, Noah. The house, the savings, the trust. Your father's pension is gone. We don't even know where we're going to live next month. I watched her closely. The guilt, the desperation, it was all there. But beneath it, I could still see the flicker of expectation, that tiny spark that said she still thought I might save them. Because I always had. But not anymore. I'm sorry you're going through that, I said quietly. Truly. But I'm not the solution to it. Her lip trembled. You'd really let your own parents end up on the street? I took a breath. You let your own son drown for 30 years because his pain didn't fit your narrative. I begged for your love, your approval, your respect, and you gave me conditions. You used my name when it suited you and erased it when it didn't. So, yes, I'm done saving people who never wanted me to exist on my own. She stared at me, speechless. My father looked down at the table, his jaw working like he wanted to speak, but couldn't. I stood. There's a fund, I said finally, for families who need emergency housing. I'll make a donation in your names. You can apply if you qualify. My father's head snapped up. You think we're charity? I met his glare evenly. I think that's all that's left. He stood too, his face red, trembling with a mix of rage and shame. You'll regret this, he hissed. One day, you'll realize money can't fill the hole where family should be. I tilted my head. You're right. But peace can. He froze at that. My mother started crying quietly as I walked to the door. I paused, just for a second, long enough to say what I'd wanted to say my entire life. I forgive you, I said softly. But that doesn't mean I'll ever let you hurt me again. And then I walked out. They didn't follow. A week later, I heard from a mutual contact that they'd moved into a small apartment on the edge of town. The investigation closed without charges, just a permanent mark on their records and the forfeiture of everything they had left. Emma filed for bankruptcy, moved out of state, and started working again. I never reached out, and she never called. The noise finally stopped. Months passed. Seasons changed. The world moved on, and so did I. One evening, I found myself sitting on the patio again, the same spot where all of this had begun, watching the sun sink into the horizon. The air was golden, the quiet deep. Maya came outside and handed me a glass of wine, settling beside me. Do you ever think about them? She asked gently. Sometimes, I said, but not with anger anymore. Just distance. She nodded. You won, you know. I smiled faintly. No, I just stopped playing. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard. For a moment, I thought about my younger self, the boy who once believed love had to be earned, who thought silence was safety. I wished I could tell him that peace doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from choosing yourself. As the last light faded, I raised my glass slightly and whispered, half to myself, here's to letting go. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. My name is Mike. I'm 36 years old. And if you told me a few years ago that I'd be the one cutting my own parents off financially, I probably would have laughed and said you were being dramatic. Back then, family meant everything to me. I grew up thinking loyalty and blood went hand in hand, that no matter what disagreements we had, my parents would always treat me and my daughter fairly. I was wrong. What happened on my little girl's birthday wasn't just a slip, wasn't just a thoughtless moment. It was a dagger shoved straight into my chest, right in front of everyone. My daughter, Emily, had just turned 7. She's the sweetest, kindest kid I've ever known. Yes, I'm her dad, so of course I'm biased, but everyone who meets her says the same. She's the type of kid who draws extra birthday cards for classmates who might feel left out, who saves the biggest slice of cake for someone else. She's thoughtful in a way most adults I know aren't. So when my parents showed up at her birthday party, I was genuinely hopeful. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe they'd see how incredible she is. The party itself was small. We rented out a little play cafe, bright walls, balloons, simple decorations, a cake Emily had picked out herself with butterflies and pastel colors. She was bouncing with excitement, wearing this sparkly purple dress she'd begged me to get. I wanted it to be her day, not some grand production, but something warm, special, and hers. When my parents walked in with my brother and sister trailing behind, arms full of gift bags and shiny wrapping paper, I thought maybe, just maybe, they were finally going to put effort into treating her like they treated the other kids in the family. I watched as my dad pulled out envelopes, crisp, white, thick envelopes that I already knew weren't just holding cards. One by one, he handed them out to my sister's kids, to my brother's kids. Their eyes lit up as they tore them open, pulling out stacks of bills and glossy, brand new iPads still in their shrink wrap. You could hear the cheers, the laughter, the ripping of packaging. My sister beamed, clapping her hands like her kids had just won the lottery. My brother leaned over to ruffle one of his son's hair, saying, "Now you'll really be the coolest kid in school." And then my dad turned to my daughter. He didn't pull out a bag. He didn't hand her an envelope. He just smirked, this cruel, dismissive twitch of a smile, and said, "She doesn't count as family." Time froze. I felt like every sound in the room had been sucked out, like all I could hear was my own heartbeat slamming in my chest. Emily's little smile faltered. She looked from her grandfather to me, confusion in her eyes, her hands twisting together because she didn't understand why she wasn't being given the same as the others. My mom looked away. Not a word of protest, not even a wince of shame. Just turned her head as if ignoring it made it disappear. My sister's kids shouted with excitement as they powered up their new tablets. My brother's kids waved their cash in the air like it was a game. And my daughter? She just stood there, her sparkly purple dress suddenly feeling too bright, too loud in the silence pressing in around us. She whispered, "Dad, did I do something wrong?" That broke me. Completely. I felt anger rise in my throat, hot and bitter, but I didn't let it out. Not there, not in front of her. Instead, I knelt down, looked her right in the eyes, and told her the only truth I could manage without falling apart. "No, sweetheart. You're perfect. You did nothing wrong." I stood up, grabbed her little hand in mine, and without another word, I walked out of that party. Past the shocked faces, past my mother's lowered eyes, past my father's smug smirk that told me he thought he'd won whatever twisted game he was playing. My daughter's tiny fingers clutched mine as we stepped into the cool air outside. On the drive home, she sat quietly, staring out the window, her cake untouched in the box on the seat between us. I kept replaying it in my head, the way my dad had said it so casually, like she was less, like she didn't matter. And I realized something that hit me like a freight train. I had been funding their lifestyle for years. The house my parents lived in, I'd been paying their mortgage. The SUV my mom drove, leased in my name. Their credit cards, I'd been covering those too, because every time they came crying about hard times, I told myself I was helping family. But what kind of family treats your child like she's invisible? That night, as Emily slept curled up with her stuffed bunny, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting off my clenched jaw. I pulled up every account, every automatic payment, every lease agreement, and I started making calls. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't even shaking. I was calm, too calm, methodical. My parents had shown me exactly what my daughter meant to them. Now, it was my turn to show them what they meant to me. And when the first text messages came in the next morning, panicked, confused, demanding to know why their cards weren't working at the grocery store, why the SUV wouldn't start, why the mortgage company had called, I didn't answer. I just poured myself a cup of coffee, sat back, and thought, maybe now they'll understand what it feels like to be told you don't count. But that was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop. At first, I thought it was just spam calls or work notifications piling up overnight. But when I rolled over and squinted at the screen, I saw my mother's name lighting up again and again. Missed call after missed call. Dozens of texts stacked one after the other. "Mike, something's wrong with the card. Did you change something with the SUV? It won't start. The bank says the mortgage hasn't cleared. What's going on?" I stared at the messages for a long moment, my coffee brewing in the background, the rich smell filling my kitchen. It was surreal, honestly. For years, I'd been the safety net, the quiet fixer. Every time my parents overspent, every time my brother took out another loan he couldn't pay back, every time my sister forgot to make a bill payment, it was me they leaned on. I never questioned it too hard. They'd call it just a temporary help, or just until things get better. Somehow, it always became permanent. And now, with one night of cutting the cord, their world had cracked. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I watched Emily pour cereal into her bowl, humming softly to herself as if nothing had happened. She was too young to fully grasp the cruelty of yesterday, but I could see the shadow of it in the way she hesitated before asking, "Daddy, are Grandma and Grandpa mad at me?" My heart tightened. I reached across the table, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and said, "No, Sweetheart. They're just figuring out some things. But listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong. You're the best part of this family. Never forget that. By the time I dropped her off at school, my phone was a war zone. My father had finally chimed in, his text short and sharp. Answer me. This isn't funny. You don't get to make decisions like this without consulting us. Consulting us. Like I hadn't been the one carrying them financially for years. Like they were the ones in charge, and I was some kid still living under their roof. I silenced the phone and went to work. But the silence didn't last. By noon, my brother called. Unlike my parents, he didn't bother with pleasantries. What did you do? He snapped as soon as I picked up. I could hear kids yelling in the background, probably his own children arguing over the new iPads. I don't know what you mean, I said, sipping my coffee calmly. Don't play dumb, Mike, he spat. Mom's crying. Dad's furious. Their cards are getting declined left and right. And the SUV, what did you do to it? Did you seriously cancel everything overnight? I let a beat of silence pass. I didn't cancel anything that wasn't in my name. He cursed under his breath, then lowered his voice as if he didn't want his wife to hear. You can't just pull the rug out like this. They depend on you. We depend on you. You know Dad's business dried up years ago. Without you, they're drowning. I leaned back in my chair. Funny. Yesterday, Dad didn't seem too concerned about who counts as family. Guess now he's realizing how much being part of the family really matters. There was silence on the other end. Then he barked, "Don't drag your kid into this. This is between you and them." I laughed, though it wasn't out of humor. That's exactly the point. He dragged her into it. He made her feel like she didn't belong, like she wasn't family. And you all sat there and let it happen. So now, you deal with the fallout. My brother tried to argue more, but I hung up before he could. That afternoon, my mom showed up at my house. I saw her through the window before she even knocked, standing on the porch wringing her hands like she was the victim in all this. When I opened the door, she tried to brush past me into the living room, but I blocked her. "Mike," she said, her voice high and breathless, "you can't just do this. Your father is humiliated. We tried to get groceries this morning, and the card declined at checkout. Do you know how embarrassing that was? Not nearly as embarrassing as telling a 7-year-old she doesn't count as family." I shot back. She flinched but didn't apologize. Instead, she pivoted. "He didn't mean it that way. You know how your father is. He speaks without thinking. He was just joking." "A joke?" I repeated, my voice flat. "You really think that was a joke?" She pressed her lips together, then sighed dramatically. "Mike, you've always been so sensitive. We've always done what we could for you. Now that you're successful, it's your turn to support the family. That's how it works. Your father provided for you, and now you provide for us." That stung, not because it was true, but because it was the story they'd been feeding me my whole life. My dad hadn't really provided. He'd scraped by, cut corners, and leaned on me the moment I started earning. But they'd built this narrative that I owed them, that every check I wrote and every payment I covered was some kind of debt repayment for being born. I stepped outside onto the porch, closing the door behind me so Emily wouldn't overhear. "Mom, listen carefully. I'm not sensitive. I'm a father protecting my daughter. And if you think I'm going to let her grow up believing she's less than her cousins because of you, you're wrong. Yesterday was the line. Dad crossed it, and you let him. I'm done." Her eyes welled up with tears, but they weren't the kind of tears that come from guilt. They were manipulative, the same kind she used when she wanted to tug at my sympathy. "Mike, if you cut us off, we'll lose everything. The house, the car, what will people think? Do you want that on your conscience?" I almost laughed again. "Funny how you worry about what people think, but not what your granddaughter feels. That tells me everything I need to know." She sputtered, tried to say more, but I walked back inside and closed the door gently in her face. For the first time in years, I felt a strange calm settle over me. But the calm didn't last long. The family group chat exploded that evening. Messages flew back and forth, my sister demanding to know how I could ruin Mom and Dad's lives like this, my brother insisting I was overreacting, my dad finally joining in with a cold, clipped line. "You've embarrassed this family enough. Fix what you broke. Fix what I broke." As if the brokenness wasn't there long before I cut off the money. And then came the kicker. My sister sent a photo into the group, her kids holding up their iPads, smiling wide, captioned, "At least some of us appreciate what Dad does for us. Too bad your daughter couldn't handle being left out for once." My hands tightened around the phone so hard I thought the screen would crack. Emily was sitting on the couch nearby, drawing quietly in her sketchbook, unaware of the digital war raging around her. I looked at her, my little girl, so innocent, so undeserving of the cruelty, and I knew this was far from over. They weren't just entitled. They were escalating. And if I thought walking away at the party was the end of it, I was wrong. This was only the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of tension and thinly veiled hostility. I had expected anger from my father, guilt tripping from my mother, and constant pestering from my siblings. But what I didn't expect was how far they were willing to go to prove a point. By the end of that week, I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about control. About them reminding me that no matter how old I was, no matter what I built, I was still expected to play the role they assigned me. The provider, the fixer, the one who sacrificed while they indulged. At first, their retaliation was small but deliberate. My sister posted passive-aggressive photos on social media, her kids playing with their new iPads, all smiles, with captions like, "Family is everything red heart." The irony, so thick it nearly made me choke. My brother started parroting the same lines in the group chat, hinting that maybe I was unstable or losing touch because I dared to step back. They weren't directly confronting me anymore. They were trying to paint me as the problem, the black sheep. But the real turning point came the following weekend. Emily had a recital at her school. She'd been practicing for weeks, every evening in her room, plucking away at her little violin with this determined frown that always melted into a proud grin when she finally got a piece right. I promised her I'd be there, front row, cheering her on no matter what. For her, this was the event of the season. When we arrived, the school auditorium was buzzing with parents, siblings, and grandparents shuffling into the seats. Emily clutched her violin case like it was made of glass, bouncing nervously on her toes as we waited. I spotted my parents across the room, sitting with my sister and brother's families. I hadn't expected them to show up. After everything, I thought maybe they'd stay away out of pride. But no, they were there, loud as ever, laughing, greeting other parents, as if nothing had happened at all. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe they'd come to support Emily, that they'd finally realized what they'd done and wanted to make it right. But that naive hope didn't last long. When Emily's group took the stage, I watched her scan the crowd, her eyes searching for familiar faces. When she spotted me, her shoulders relaxed, and she gave a tiny wave. I waved back, my chest swelling with pride. But then her eyes drifted to the other side of the auditorium, toward my parents, my sister, and my brother. That's when it happened. My dad leaned over to my sister, whispered something, and suddenly they all started laughing. Not the kind of laughter that bubbles up naturally, but sharp, deliberate, cruel. And as Emily lifted her bow to the strings, my father cupped his hands around his mouth and said, loud enough for the nearby rows to hear, "Hope she doesn't squeak like last time." The words sliced through the silence of the auditorium like a knife. A few parents glanced around, frowning, but my family just smirked, pretending it was harmless fun. My daughter froze. Her little hands trembled on the bow, and I could see the panic flooding her face. She squeaked. Not once, not twice, but the whole way through. Every note fractured, every rhythm fell apart. She tried to keep going, but tears welled up in her eyes, and by the end of the song, her chin was quivering. The applause came anyway. Parents always clap for kids, but it was scattered, hesitant, because everyone had heard the remark. Everyone had seen the way my daughter crumbled under it. I wanted to storm across that auditorium, grab my father by the collar, and drag him out. But I didn't. Not then. I forced myself to stay seated because Emily needed to see me calm. She needed to know that I wasn't shaken, even if I was burning inside. After the recital, she walked off stage, her violin dangling limply at her side. She didn't run into my arms the way she usually did. Instead, she whispered, "Daddy, why did Grandpa say that? Why would he laugh at me?" I crouched down, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Because some people don't know how to be kind, sweetheart. But you were brave up there, and that's what matters." Behind us, I could hear my family gathering their things, laughing as if they hadn't just humiliated a child. My sister's voice carried above the crowd. "Well, I guess she's not going to Juilliard anytime soon." More laughter. My mom didn't stop them. She didn't even look ashamed. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I had tolerated years of manipulation, years of being used like an ATM, years of being dismissed. But now, it wasn't just me. They had come after Emily, intentionally, in public, and broken something pure inside her. It wasn't favoritism anymore. It wasn't passive neglect. It was cruelty. Deliberate, targeted cruelty. On the ride home, Emily sat silently in the back seat, her violin untouched beside her. Normally, she'd chatter all the way home, dissecting every detail of her performance, laughing about little mistakes, asking if I thought she did well. But that night, she just stared out the window, her reflection pale against the dark glass. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles whitened. My thoughts raced. Memories of every time they'd cut me down, every time they'd told me I owed them, every time they'd treated my daughter like she was less. And I realized, with absolute clarity, that I couldn't just cut them off financially. That was too easy for them to work around. No, I needed to take back something bigger, something they'd never expect. But before I even had the chance to formulate a plan, the betrayal deepened. The next morning, I found out my father had been talking to Emily's teacher. He had innocently pulled her aside after the recital and told her that Emily was sensitive and not really cut out for music. He suggested she be placed in less demanding activities. The teacher, bless her, called me directly and told me about it because she thought it was strange and inappropriate. She reassured me she wouldn't take his words seriously, but hearing it nearly made me sick. He wasn't just humiliating her publicly. He was trying to sabotage her privately. And when I confronted him about it, he didn't even deny it. He just shrugged over the phone and said, "Better she learns now than wastes everyone's time later." That was it. That was the breaking point. The emotional turning point I couldn't come back from. I looked at my daughter that night, curled up in bed, her violin case tucked under the covers like she was trying to protect it from the world. And I made a silent promise. Whatever it took, however long it took, they would never hurt her like this again. And when I was done, they would regret ever thinking she didn't count. After the recital and that phone call from Emily's teacher, something inside me shifted. Up until that point, I'd been angry, furious, even, but I still held on to this thread of disbelief. I kept thinking maybe they'd come to their senses, maybe they'd apologize, maybe deep down they just didn't realize how much damage they were causing. But when I realized my father had gone out of his way to try and sabotage Emily's music, it was like a curtain dropped. That thin, fragile hope I had about reconciliation was gone. I didn't sleep much that week. Nights stretched into hours of staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying everything over and over. The look on Emily's face at her birthday party, the tears in her eyes on stage, the smug smirk my father wore while dismissing her as not family. Each memory cut deeper, not because of what it meant for me, but because of what it was doing to my daughter. I started to notice changes in her too. She was quieter, less bubbly. Her violin sat untouched in its case for days, and when I gently asked if she wanted to practice, she shook her head and mumbled, "Maybe later." Later never came. It broke me to see her light dim like that. Emily had always been this vibrant, glowing presence in my life. Her laughter could fill a room. Her imagination could turn an empty living room into a castle. Now it was like someone had poured water over that flame, leaving only smoke. And I knew exactly who had struck the match. At work, I found myself staring blankly at my computer screen, my mind wandering. My coworkers probably thought I was just tired, but the truth was I was unraveling inside. I had spent years bending over backward to keep my family afloat, convincing myself it was what good sons did. And in return, they treated the one person who mattered most to me as disposable. It wasn't just cruel. It was a betrayal of everything family was supposed to mean. The texts didn't stop, either. My father would alternate between icy silence and harsh demands. Restore the payments. Enough games. Then a day later, "You'll regret this if you don't fix it." My mother leaned on guilt, sending long messages about how family isn't perfect and we all make mistakes, and don't punish us over one little comment. She'd never mention the recital, or the teacher, or the deliberate cruelty. It was always framed like I was the one overreacting, like I was tearing the family apart. My sister and brother chimed in too. "You're embarrassing everyone. Don't make your daughter the center of your tantrums. Think about mom and dad's reputation." I didn't reply to any of them. Not once. But their voices lingered, echoing in my head when the house grew quiet at night. I'd pace the kitchen, A glass of water in my hand I barely remembered pouring, and I'd wonder how I got here. How had I allowed myself to become so entangled, so obligated, that cutting them off felt like sawing off a limb? How had I spent years financing people who couldn't even muster the decency to clap for my daughter? It was in those long, restless nights that the grief hit hardest. Because it was grief, grieving the parents I thought I had, the family I thought existed. I realized I had been clinging to an illusion, some childhood belief that if I just gave enough, they'd love me enough in return. But they didn't. Not me, and certainly not Emily. The hardest moment came one evening when Emily padded into the living room, dragging her violin behind her like it was too heavy to carry. She plopped onto the couch next to me, resting her head against my arm. "Daddy," she whispered, "do you think I should stop playing?" My throat tightened. "Why would you say that?" She shrugged, her little shoulders rising and falling. "Grandpa said I'm not good, and I don't want to mess up again." Everyone laughed. I pulled her into my arms, holding her so tight she squirmed. "Sweetheart, listen to me. You are good. You're better than good. You're brave. You went up on that stage, and you played even when you were scared. That's what makes you amazing. Not whether every note was perfect." She was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "But what if I'm not family enough?" That nearly shattered me. I pressed my forehead against hers and said, "You are my family. You're my whole world. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." When she fell asleep in my arms, I carried her to bed and sat by her side for a long time, watching her chest rise and fall. And that's when the planning began, not in some dramatic flash of inspiration, but in small, deliberate thoughts that built slowly. I couldn't just cut them off and hope they'd fade away. They were too entitled, too stubborn. They'd claw their way back into our lives, always finding new ways to hurt her. No, I needed to make sure Emily and I were untouchable. That meant reevaluating everything, my finances, my will, my home. It meant drawing lines so deep in the sand they couldn't be crossed. I started quietly. I met with a lawyer under the pretense of updating some routine paperwork, but what I really wanted was to set protections in place. I asked about trusts, about guardianship, about how to make sure Emily's future was locked away where my family couldn't reach it. I didn't tell anyone, not even close friends, because I knew if word got out, my family would twist it into more ammunition. I also started pulling back socially. I stopped going to extended family dinners, stopped answering phone calls, stopped showing up at events I'd normally feel obligated to attend. The excuses were easy. Work's busy. Emily has school. We've got other plans. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. My sister posted online about how some people think they're too good for their own family, clearly aimed at me. My brother dropped hints in the group chat about me, isolating Emily. My mom even sent a long, dramatic message to everyone, talking about how I was turning my child against her grandparents. The irony was almost laughable. They had done that all by themselves. But isolation has a cost. As I pulled away, the loneliness crept in. Nights felt heavier, quieter. Even with Emily's laughter still filling the house, I felt the absence of something I used to think was permanent. It's a strange kind of pain, mourning people who are still alive. Still, beneath the grief, something steady was growing. Resolve. I couldn't change who they were. I couldn't make them see Emily's worth. But I could make sure she grew up never doubting it herself. And I could make sure my family learned that actions have consequences, ones they couldn't buy their way out of with cash-stuffed envelopes or shiny new gadgets. By the time the month turned over, their calls had grown more desperate. My father even showed up at my office one afternoon, waiting outside the building like some storm cloud ready to burst. I slipped out the back before he could corner me. I wasn't ready yet. Not for the confrontation, not for the explosion I knew was coming. But deep down, I could feel it building. I was nearing a breaking point, and when it came, there'd be no going back. When you hit rock bottom, you either stay there and let the weight crush you, or you find something inside yourself you didn't know was there and start climbing. For a while, I didn't know which I'd be. I'd wake up, make Emily breakfast, take her to school, sit at my desk at work, and go through the motions like a man underwater, slow, heavy, muffled. But little by little, cracks of light started breaking through. The first shift came from Emily herself. One afternoon, I came home from work and found her in the living room with her violin out again. She wasn't playing anything serious, just plucking at strings, making silly noises, laughing at how squeaky it sounded. but it was the first time since the recital that she'd touched it. I leaned against the doorway, watching her experiment, her giggles filling the room, and I realized something. She was resilient, stronger than I'd given her credit for. They had tried to crush her, and while she bent under the weight, she hadn't broken. That lit something in me. I started leaning into my work again. For years, I'd built my career in finance quietly, not broadcasting it to my family, because I didn't want to feed their entitlement. I owned a growing consulting firm, steady clients, good contracts, nothing flashy. But now I doubled down. I began chasing bigger accounts, investing more time into hiring sharp people, expanding into areas I'd been too cautious to touch before. Every extra hour I poured into the business wasn't just about me. It was about Emily's future, about building something so solid and untouchable that no one, not even my parents, could claim a piece of it. And success came quickly once I shifted gears. The firm landed a massive deal with a tech company that had been circling us for months. That one contract alone doubled our revenue for the quarter. I reinvested immediately, opening a new office in a neighboring city. For the first time in a long while, I felt momentum pulling me forward instead of dragging me down. With that momentum came power, financial power, yes, but also emotional. The more I grew, the less my family's absence felt like a wound, and the more it felt like freedom. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their validation. I was proving to myself, day after day, that I could thrive without them. It wasn't just about work, though. I threw myself into Emily's world, too. If my family wasn't going to celebrate her, I would. I signed her up for art classes, painting, clay, anything that let her creativity out. I took her to a music shop and let her pick out new strings for her violin, telling her it was an upgrade for a real musician. Slowly, her spark started coming back. She'd run up to me after class, proudly showing me messy paintings of butterflies or lopsided clay animals, her face glowing. One night, I found her asleep at her desk with sheet music under her cheek. It was a simple lullaby she was trying to master. I tucked her into bed and sat staring at that music for a long time. That tiny piece of paper, with crooked notes penciled in by her small hand, meant more than any check I'd ever written for my parents. Meanwhile, my family's decline was visible from a distance. My brother had to sell his car after failing to make payments. My sister posted cryptic rants online about fake people who abandoned their families. My parents' house, once meticulously maintained, started showing signs of neglect, the lawn overgrown, the shutters peeling. Word trickled back to me through mutual acquaintances. They were struggling. And yet, they still tried to spin the story. In the group chat, they claimed I was the selfish one, that I was flaunting my success while letting them rot. My father even sent a message one night saying, "You wouldn't have anything if not for me. Remember who raised you." I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on something that would make them irrelevant. I met again with my lawyer, expanding the plans I'd begun during my lowest point. We structured a trust for Emily that secured every dollar I earned for her future. We built clauses that locked out any claim from relatives. My lawyer even chuckled at how ironclad I wanted it. "Mike," he said, "you're essentially building a fortress around her inheritance. They won't be able to touch a cent." "That's the point," I told him. At the same time, I began making subtle moves at work that gave me influence in circles my family couldn't even dream of reaching. Networking dinners, charity events, local sponsorships. I was shaking hands with CEOs, donors, people who carried weight in the community. And with every connection I built, my parents' relevance shrank further. I wasn't just distancing myself. I was outgrowing them entirely. But here's the thing about growth. It doesn't erase the scars. As much as life was improving, the hurt lingered. There were nights I'd pour a drink and sit in silence, thinking about how it could have been different. If my father had just clapped at that recital, if my mother had just said, "She's family," if my siblings had just once stood up for Emily, maybe things wouldn't have gotten this far. But they didn't. And every success I stacked up only reminded me of what they'd thrown away. Emily, though, she noticed the change. She'd crawl into my lap sometimes and say, "Daddy, you smile more now." That broke me in a different way. Because she was right. I was smiling more. Not because the pain was gone, but because I finally felt like I was steering our lives instead of being yanked around by guilt. One Saturday, I took her to the park, and while she ran ahead, chasing bubbles with other kids, I sat on a bench and let the sun warm my face. For the first time in months, I felt light. I realized that no matter what storm my family tried to throw at me, I was stronger now. Emily was stronger. And together, we were building something better than the mess I came from. Of course, peace never lasts long. My family wasn't done. They couldn't accept that I was rising while they sank. The more they struggled, the more desperate they became. And desperate people make reckless choices. I didn't know it yet, but the real battle was only beginning. By the time spring rolled around, I had settled into a rhythm. Work was booming, Emily was laughing again, and I had built a kind of invisible wall between us and the rest of my family. They were still trying, of course, still texting, still leaving voicemails, still posting their not-so-subtle digs on social media, but they were no longer getting through. At least not directly. But while I had finally pulled myself and Emily into a place of stability, I couldn't shake the gnawing thought that this wasn't over. My parents weren't the type to slink away quietly. They thrived on control, on appearances, and on other people's money. Without me funding their lives, they were cornered animals, and cornered animals lash out. It was during this uneasy calm that something unexpected fell into my lap. One afternoon, my business partner forwarded me an email from a regional bank we sometimes dealt with. It was routine, just some financial statements. But attached at the bottom, I noticed a familiar name. My father. Apparently, he'd been applying for a line of credit and had listed me as a guarantor. Without my consent, I stared at the document in disbelief. It had my name, my address, even my business listed. He had forged my information. My blood ran cold as I scrolled through the details. Not only had he tried to leverage my financial credibility, but he'd also grossly exaggerated his own assets, claiming ownership of things I knew for a fact he didn't have anymore. For years, I'd quietly bailed them out of messes like this. I'd write the checks, smooth it over, and let them off the hook. But this time, I wasn't bailing them out. This time, I saved the email, forwarded it to my lawyer, and began a different kind of planning. When I met with my lawyer later that week, he whistled low as he read through the file. "Mike, this isn't just desperate. This is fraud. If the bank pushes, your father could be in very real legal trouble." I leaned back in my chair. "Good." He looked at me over his glasses, eyebrows raised. "You're not planning to bail him out?" "No," I said firmly. "Not this time. Not ever again." We sat in silence for a moment before he asked, "Do you want to pursue this?" I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to throw the whole thing back in my father's face, to show him the proof and watch him squirm. But another part of me wanted patience. I had leverage now, and leverage is worth more when you let it ripen. That was the seed of my plan. Over the next few weeks, I started pulling threads, quietly, carefully. I spoke with contacts in the business community, the same ones I'd been shaking hands with at dinners and charity events. It turned out, my father's name had come up before. He had a reputation in certain circles, someone who once had money but was notorious for bad debts and borrowing connections. The more I listened, the clearer the picture became. He wasn't just struggling financially. He was on the brink of losing everything. And my mother? I learned she'd been bragging in her book club for years about how generous her son was, painting the picture of me as their lifelong safety net. Some of the women in that group had quietly reached out to me. One even apologized, saying, "We always thought you didn't mind," the way she told it. That infuriated me, but it also gave me more fuel. I wasn't going to let their narrative stand unchallenged forever. Then there was my brother. He had gotten into real estate investments a few years back, riding the market while it was hot. Now, with the downturn, he was drowning in debt. Rumor had it, he was behind on multiple mortgages. My sister wasn't any better. She'd tried to start some boutique, mom business, selling overpriced candles and home decor, but it had flopped spectacularly. She was living off credit cards and her husband's paycheck. One by one, the pillars of their entitlement were crumbling. And here I was, in the strongest position of my life. At home, I started preparing Emily too, not in a direct way, but in little lessons. I'd teach her about saving, about the difference between needs and wants, about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who lift you up instead of drag you down. I never mentioned her grandparents directly, but I saw the way her eyes sharpened when she listened. She understood more than I gave her credit for. The turning point came when I was invited to a local gala. It was a charity fundraiser for children's arts programs. Fitting, given Emily's love for music. I decided to attend, partly to show support, partly to continue building connections. That night, As I stood in the ballroom surrounded by business leaders, I realized just how far I'd come. I wasn't the quiet son in the shadow of his parents anymore. I was a man who could stand on his own, command respect, and build a future without anyone's permission. And then, fate handed me another weapon. At the gala, I bumped into an old acquaintance who happened to work in municipal planning. We chatted casually, and he mentioned, almost in passing, that there was a new development project being reviewed, one that just so happened to border the neighborhood where my parents lived. He joked about how property taxes there were about to skyrocket if the project went through. That nugget stuck with me. My parents were already struggling to pay their bills. If taxes rose significantly, they'd be in even deeper trouble. And I had the resources to not only weather it, but to benefit from it. If I positioned myself right, I could end up owning property in that very area, maybe even theirs, without lifting a finger to take it. The market would do it for me. For weeks, I played it cool. I gathered documents, kept the fraudulent bank application tucked away, built my contacts, and expanded the trust I'd set up for Emily. Every move I made was quiet, deliberate, surgical. My family had no idea how far ahead I was setting the chessboard. They still thought they could bully me back into submission with guilt and insults. They had no clue I was about to turn the board upside down. It was around this time that my mother tried a new tactic. She showed up at Emily's school unannounced. I got a call from the front office telling me that Grandma had stopped by with cookies for the kids. When I arrived, my mom was in the lobby, beaming like nothing had ever happened. Emily, on the other hand, stood stiffly beside her, looking uncomfortable. "Mike," my mom said brightly, as if we were in the middle of some happy reunion. I thought I'd surprise Emmy. I took Emily's hand and looked my mother dead in the eye. "Don't ever come here unannounced again." Her smile faltered. "Oh, don't be dramatic. I'm her grandmother. I have every right to see her." "No," I said flatly. "You don't. Not anymore." The silence that followed was thick. Emily squeezed my hand, and for the first time, I saw her look at her grandmother not with confusion or longing, but with a kind of quiet resolve. That was the moment I knew I wasn't just protecting her anymore. I was teaching her how to protect herself. And while my family thought they were still playing the same old game, I was already 3 moves ahead. Because soon, very soon, I was going to use everything I'd learned, the forged documents, the financial instability, the community connections, and even the rising property taxes, to make sure they understood exactly what it meant when I said Emily and I didn't count on them anymore. They always said things have a way of coming back around. They just never meant it would hit them for me. I'd spent months laying the groundwork, legal locks around Emily's future, quiet conversations with people who owed me favors, learning the slow language of municipal politics, and collecting proof. The forged bank document was the first domino. Once I handed that file to my lawyer, the bank's fraud department did what banks do when you hand them a smoking gun. They opened a formal investigation, froze the questionable applications, and started asking very uncomfortable questions. My father called me a coward for not fixing it, like I owed him the privilege of bailing him out of his own lies. I didn't answer. But legal trouble is only half the equation. The other half was leverage. I had cultivated that, piece by patient piece. There were the property rumors I'd quietly confirmed at the gala, the development that would upend the neighborhood, the tax reassessments that were likely to follow. There were the names of the contractors and the purchasing agents who would move first. There was the quiet account of my brother's failed investments. His mortgages were fragile enough that one sudden tax spike would make them collapse like a house of cards. I didn't start the market forces. No, I simply positioned myself so that when the market moved, I could steer the consequences in ways that exposed more than just balances and ledgers. Early on a Tuesday, the dominoes started to fall. It began small and ordinary. My sister's social feed lit up with the usual smiling family photos. Only this time, one of the photos had an unexpected caption. A mutual friend from the school committee, someone who'd heard the story from the fundraiser circuit, reposted an old picture of my parents with the line, "Funny how some families demand gratitude while treating others like dirt." The comment thread filled with questions. People I'd met at work, neighbors, even a few of the women from my mother's book club who'd privately sent me apologies. Suddenly, they were public. My sister reacted the way entitled people do, defensively, with outrage and conspiracy theories. But outrage doesn't explain away screenshots or bank records when they're laid out in order. Then came the bank. They called my father in for questioning about the guarantee. Their inquiries weren't secret. The bank's legal team made sure there was a paper trail. For the first time since I'd been paying the mortgage and the SUV lease, he had to sit across from strangers and explain why I was listed as a guarantor on loans he had no right to attach my name to. He fumbled. He lied. When the bank threatened to refer the case to the district attorney, his voice went small. There are few things more humiliating to someone who built a life around machismo than realizing it's not bluster that protects you. It's paper and signatures and truth. At the same time, my brother's lender called him in about an accelerating default. A tax reassessment followed by a home insurance reevaluation had pushed his payments into arrears. My brother's pride had kept him from asking me for help. He'd always loved the drama of outspending his means, but pride can't pay a mortgage when the math changes overnight. He sold the nicer of his cars in a panic and started floating messages about tough times on social media, the kind of thinly veiled pleas that used to come straight to my phone with begging eyes, and just until next month. Not this time. And then the most delicious little stroke of all, the SUV. I had canceled the lease months ago and put the car back into a holding account that the leasing company could take whatever action they needed on. I'd ensured every return notice was legally spotless, no grounds for complaint. Late one afternoon, I got a forwarded text from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. A photo of the SUV being towed away from the grocery store parking lot. My mother's face red and furious in the reflection of the rear window, the tow operator looking bored and professional. The caption read, "When you spend like it's 2010, but live like it's 1995. The image traveled faster than any family group chat argument ever had. I didn't dance on graves. I'm not some cartoon villain. But there was a small, private warmth to watching the consequences of their choices land where they belonged. For years they had weaponized shame against me. Used the idea of what people will think to keep me paying, to keep me quiet, to keep my daughter in her place. Now the public questions and the very visible unpaid balances were the things keeping them up at night. I'd moved them out from behind their closed doors and into the light where their behavior couldn't be smoothed over by excuse or manipulation. Still, I kept my moves surgical. When the bank's investigator called to ask if I wanted to file a criminal complaint for identity fraud, my lawyer and I discussed it like two chess players analyzing lines. It would take months, possibly longer, and it would shred their credit in a way that could cascade into forced sales and bankruptcies. It would humiliate them in court. It would also, inevitably, drag Emily into public family turmoil. I thought about that. And then I thought about the recital, the birthday party, the way my father had smiled as if he were the one in the right, and made the decision. We filed. That evening, the district attorney's office sent a letter acknowledging receipt of the complaint and requesting cooperation in their preliminary inquiry. The letter arrived in a plain white envelope, but the effect it had on our life was anything but plain. My mother called me in a panic, voice high and accusing. "This is a witch hunt," she said. "You're going to ruin us." My brother texted me a string of capital letters and exclamation points. My sister resorted to passive-aggressive posts about how families should stick together. Each response only tightened my resolve. I'd expected a backlash. I'd anticipated the family chant of "How could you?" The attempts to shame me into rolling everything back. But I hadn't expected the community to tilt. The PDA emails started to include awkward silence when my mother tried to book the bake sale table. Invitations stopped arriving. People in our neighborhood, the same ones who used to chuckle and nod at their generosity, began to edge away. That hurt them more than being denied cash. They were social animals, and social standing was their oxygen. While the legal process unfolded, I executed another layer of the plan. I used my LLC to buy a small parcel of property 2 streets over from my parents' house, a vacant lot that the development I'd heard about would soon make valuable. I didn't buy it to gloat. I bought it because in a few months, when rezoning and taxes took their course, I wanted to be in a position to make a fair market offer that the bank or an auctioneer would accept. In the worst-case scenario, I could be the purchaser at a trustee sale. Owning the lot would be a move in the same game they'd try to play with me. Only I was playing by the rules, and brilliantly. There were procedural satisfactions along the way. Formal letters from lawyers, terse phone calls from people I'd once done favors for politely declining further contact, the quiet snubbing of my parents at community events. But the thing that put the most salt in the wound wasn't the legal paperwork or the auctions or the repossessions. It was the shift in the way Emily held herself. She watched as this house of cards shook and fell around them, and instead of crumbling again like she had at the recital, she stood straighter. She asked me questions, fewer about revenge, more about fairness and strength. Why do people treat some kids differently? She'd ask over cereal. Because sometimes people are small inside, I'd tell her. And when they're small, they try to make others feel small too. But you're not small, Em. You never were. She'd smile, and the light in her eyes came back in flashes that warmed something in me that had been raw for a long time. Then the final piece fell into place, the one I'd been building toward without telling anyone. The bank, unsettled by the fraud and nervous about potential liability, chose to foreclose on the smallest of the outstanding properties tied to my father's name. It wasn't the house he'd always boasted about. It was a rental he'd used as collateral on a line of credit. The auction notice went out publicly, posted in the legal section of the paper, and my legal team confirmed the date. I could have let it go to auction and stood back, watching them scramble. I could have let the market take them and quietly purchased the property later. But there's an art to vengeance, timing, theater, precision, and the thought of simply being the anonymous buyer felt anticlimactic. What I wanted was for them to understand, finally and fully, the cost of their choices. I wanted a moment where they looked up from the rubble of their lives and saw me standing there, calm, composed, and unbothered. I wanted the look on my father's face when he realized his prying hands had been swapped for a closed door. So I arranged a small thing. I told my lawyer I wanted to be present at the auction under an assumed company name. I had the cashier's check ready. I had the LLC paperwork prepared to transfer the deed. I told Emily only that we were going to see how auctions work. No fanfare, no talk of revenge, only a quiet lesson in markets and consequences. On the morning of the sale, I woke earlier than usual. The air had that clean, electric quality of a day when something irreversible is about to happen. I tucked Emily's hand into mine and drove past our old neighborhood toward the municipal building where trustee sales were held. People milled around, mostly strangers, some curious neighbors. My parents weren't there yet. They'd been scrambling, calling every relative they could in hopes someone would bail them out at the last minute. Pride can make you slow to act, and shame can make you slow to ask. I checked my phone. A message from my sister. Where are you? A string of frantic posts from my mother. PLENG, begging, promises to change, had started sprinkling across social media. The kind of desperate performance they thought would sway me. It wouldn't. I felt a small, private compassion for them. They were panicking in the only language they knew. Inside the room, bids began. The auctioneer called the numbers in that sing-song cadence that makes property feel like a commodity rather than a home. I held the bid card with an odd detachment, like someone watching a stage performance from the back row. The prices climbed. People shuffled pieces of paper. My heart beat steady. When the property was finally within reach, I raised my card just once. The gavel came down. The murmurs in the room shifted. I signed the paperwork. We transferred funds. It took mere minutes, dry and administrative, to make the purchase legally binding. But I knew what the ripple would look like. Statements to the credit bureaus, liens recorded, the bank's exposure finally visible on paper. I had done this with surgical calm. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. My father's voice on the line was thin and cracked. "Mike," he said, as if addressing a stranger. "Please, we can fix this." "We can't," he couldn't finish. I listened, the corner of my mouth lifting in a way that felt unfamiliar and righteous. "I already fixed it," I said softly. "I bought the property today." I heard silence on the other end, and then the sputter of disbelief. "You can avoid a lot of pain if you leave Emily out of your life. Walk away. Let us be." The thermostat of my conscience clicked. The words were blunt, but they were the truth. He begged. I stayed calm. I offered one last, quiet olive branch. If they participated in family counseling and made a public apology acknowledging what they'd done, I would consider unwinding some of the more public actions with counsel. It was a conditional apology. Yes, protection always is, but it was real leverage tied to real consequences. He said no. So I let the motion continue. As we drove back, Emily chattered about how auctions were kind of like a game, and I told her that sometimes people play hard and unfair, and sometimes you have to be willing to play better. The sun was bright, the car hummed, and a small, unbidden thought crossed my mind. This was working. The plan was unfolding the way I had constructed it in the quiet hours. The legal complaints, the targeted purchases, the strategy of letting the market do half the work while my actions did the other half. We pulled into the driveway, and my phone buzzed. It was my sister. It was a short message. "You're going to regret this." I read it, then looked down at Emily, who had fallen asleep against the window, violin case snug beside her like a sleeping animal. I was about to press send on a final email to my lawyer, one that would initiate the next phase, the public notice and the transfer of title, when my hand hesitated. There was another call buzzing, my father, again, and beyond him, the slow, cooling voice of our town gossiping in the background on social media. I thought of the recital, of the birthday party, of my daughter's small, confused face asking why she wasn't enough. I opened the draft email, read the last clause I'd written, one that spelled out the terms of their last chance, and then stopped. I realized I was moments away from pulling a trigger that would change everything. Not just their lives, but our lives, in a way that might be irreversible. I set the phone down. The sun fell across Emily's face. I thought of forgiveness, of silence, of the kind of person I wanted to be when all of it was done. Then I thought of my daughter's violin under the blanket, of the way she'd found the courage to pick it up again, and I tightened my jaw. I hit send on the email. The rest had to be handled in person. I booked a time to meet with them at the community center under the pretense of wanting to talk things through. I told no one the truth about what I'd bought that morning. I wanted their reactions to be genuine, not manufactured by knowledge. When the three of them walked into the fluorescent-lit room that afternoon, my mother clutching a tissue box like it was proof of performance, my father looking oddly smaller, my sister glaring like someone used to being obeyed, I felt the weight of the moment settle like a held breath. I stood, and for the first time in years, I looked at them as if they were strangers. "Before we start," I said, reaching into my bag, "there's something you need to know." And then I showed them the deed. The look on their faces when I laid the deed on the table was worth more than every dollar I'd spent, more than every sleepless night, more than every bitter text I'd ignored. My father's jaw went slack, my mother's tissue froze halfway to her cheek, and my sister actually laughed at first, until she saw the seal on the document. "You're lying," my father said finally, his voice low and shaky, like an old dog trying to bare its teeth one last time. I slid the paper toward them. "It's public record. You can look it up yourself." My sister snatched it, eyes darting back and forth across the lines. Her face drained. "No, this can't be right. You wouldn't do this to us." "I didn't do this to you," I said evenly. "You did it to yourselves. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences." My mother let out this wailing sound, half anger, half grief. "We're your family, Mike. How could you humiliate us like this? After everything we've done for you?" I laughed then, quietly, shaking my head. "Everything you've done for me? Like telling my daughter she doesn't count as family? Like laughing while she cried on stage? Like sabotaging her with her teacher? If that's what family is, I'd rather have none." My father tried to rally, pounding the table. "You owe us respect," he barked. I met his glare and didn't flinch. "Respect isn't owed, it's earned. And you lost mine the second you decided my child was disposable." The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time in my life, they had nothing to throw back. No threats, no guilt trips, no manipulative speeches. Just the crushing weight of their own ruin. My sister snapped first, slamming her hands on the table. "You'll regret this. When people find out what you did." "They already know," I cut in. "You've made sure of that with your own behavior. People aren't blind. They've seen the way you treat Emily, the way you twist every story. The only thing I've done is stop covering for you." Her face twisted, but no words came out. I stood then, slipping the deed back into my folder. "Here's how this goes. You stay away from me. You stay away from my daughter. If you can't manage that, the next papers you'll see won't be property deeds, they'll be subpoenas. Consider this your last warning." My father's eyes, once full of fire, now looked small. Beaten. He muttered something under his breath, but I didn't care to hear it. I turned to leave, Emily's future tucked safely under my arm. As I walked out of that room, my mother called after me, her voice breaking. "You'll regret turning your back on us." I stopped in the doorway, looked back once, and said the only truth that mattered. "No, I regret not doing it sooner." And then I left them there, in the stale light of that community center, with nothing but the echo of their own failure. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread like cracks through glass. The bank pressed charges, their reputation collapsed, and the community that once excused their arrogance turned cold. My brother sold off what little he had left, my sister's business dissolved, and my parents' house, over-leveraged and drowning under back taxes, eventually went up for sale. I didn't buy it. I didn't need to. They had already lost the only thing that mattered: control. Meanwhile, Emily thrived. She picked up her violin again, slowly at first, then with the same joy she once had. At her next recital, she played with confidence, her bow steady, her chin lifted. When the applause came, she looked out into the audience and found me smiling back at her. Not my parents, not my siblings. Just me. And that was enough. Afterward, she ran into my arms, breathless and beaming. "Did you hear, Daddy?" I didn't squeak this time. I hugged her tight, the sound of her laughter filling every empty place my family had left behind. I heard, "Sweetheart, you were perfect." And in that moment, I realized something. Revenge hadn't just been about tearing them down. It had been about building us up, me and her, together, free from their shadows. They had tried to make her feel like she didn't count. Now the world was proving otherwise. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she whispered, "Daddy, we don't need them, do we?" I kissed her forehead. "No, Emily, we never did." And with that, the chapter closed, not with shouting or chaos, but with quiet triumph. They had lost everything they thought made them powerful, and we had gained everything they could never touch. The final line, the one that stayed with me, wasn't something I said out loud. It was something I felt deep in my chest as I watched my daughter drift to sleep, safe and loved. In the end, they were right about one thing: family is everything. They just never realized mine started and ended with her.